All right, everyone, welcome to Mandala. The show today, this one, blessed by the presence of the very exalted. Well, how do we describe our spoken word, methamphetamine-based comedian, Lord Sir Montgomery Custard? How are you today?
Oh, not too bad, a bit sticky.
As happens. Are there any desserts you think are permittable on this earth outside of Australia's favourite custard, as featured in Peter Jackson's Brain Dead?
Ooh, that's good stuff. Yeah, tiramisu.
Greek, yeah.
You could have the croquet bush, as made popular by everybody's favourite reality TV program. And obviously pavlova. I'm claiming that, sticking the flag in it for Australia. It's where I was from.
Yeah.
It's who will enjoy it.
You still endorse the boycott against Bulla, I assume?
Yeah, man, they're kind of mean, you know. They're the schoolyard buller, one might say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just those annoying commercials in the 2000s, like, they drive you up the fucking wall, right?
Oh, with Dennis the Menace pissing off his neighbour.
Yeah. Just repulsive, really. I don't know what they were thinking
Yeah,
with that. Highly immoral.
It wasn't Lube Mobile.
Or, read my beak.
What's
that? Get inside!
A sort of transcendent psychedelic ad with like a CGI elephant in a pool.
Of course, yeah, on the Parish of Blue.
Pool Haven.
Sorry. What's Parish of Blue?
That's a ski resort.
Excuse me, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking Blue. Yeah, Blue Haven.
Yeah, Blue Haven.
Australian ads.
Yeah.
So someone mentioned more in the comments if you like. Anyway, we're going to be talking about some releases today, as we have done in previous programs. This one will be no exception. There's not fucking with this formula. And anyway,
Chemical X.
I think we're going to be starting with this interesting little release here, which there's two sets of contexts I need to give, firstly, and I hope you don't mind if I go on for a little bit here before we go into...
set the scene.
Yeah, let's set the scene.
Scotland.
Well, it's 1979 in particular, and we think of this as a very seminal year. I mean, obviously, the first major post-punk albums are considered to have come out in, 1978?
78, I suppose.
Releases by Pill Magazine,
Scream.
Susie and the Banshees, some singles. There's that Saints Prehistoric Sounds, which I'm inclined to mention, but whether that's post-punk is a bit... brilliant album.
I think it was recorded in England.
So both Eternally Yours and Prehistoric Sounds, they were recorded in the UK, and they were based there at the time.
Eternally Yours isn't as first wave punk as the first album is, but it has quite a few of those sort of first wave punk style songs, but it's got other more traditional songs even. So anyway, we're not talking about the Saints, so let's keep going, I suppose.
But yeah, 79, we saw the release of many albums which are ubiquitous with the genre now. I'll just go through some of these. Unknown Pleasures, Metal Box, Why by the Pop Group, 154, Wire, Free Imaginary Boys, The Cure, Secondhand Daylight, Magazine, Join Hands, Susie and the Banshees, A Trip to Marineville, Swell Maps, they'll be invoked a bit later, actually, a fair bit later.
Yeah.
Entertainment, Gang of Four, both Live at the Witch Trials and Dragnet by The Fall. And then we've got to give the ladies, other than Susie Susan mentions, Cut by the Slits and The Raincoat self-titled, which is fantastic.
Yeah, nice.
And then some stuff that's maybe not necessarily post-punk, but is somewhat adjacent to it. You know, the new wave of Drums and Wires by XTC, the more complicated sort of world music punk, which The Clash embarked upon on the famous London Calling.
Yeah.
And let's talk about The Damned on Machine Gun Etiquette were a little bit more sophisticated than it had been in the past, perhaps.
Yeah, sure.
It's fair to say. The synth pop of Two Boy Army, Replicas, and then Gary Newman going on to do Pleasure Principle that same year. And why not mention the Meccans, The Quality of Mercy is not... Strong, or whatever that.
Oh, the Mekons?
Mekons, yeah.
With the K?
Yes.
Yeah. They're a cool, under the radar band.
No, that's a good album.
I think their fans are hardcore, but yeah, no, they got. I've sampled quite a few of their albums. Which one's that one? What's the cover?
It's a chimp.
Oh yeah, that's classic. I think that's the first album, right?
I don't know if it's the first one. I'm going to assume so. And just for the sake of yes, it is. Because we can do that in this current year. Anyway, but even across the pond, across the Atlantic in the States, you had some famous post-punky sort of releases that everyone always talks about some of the greatest music ever recorded. People think Fear of Music by Talking Heads. Oh, Judy Now for the Future by Devo. Ubu, New Picnic Time.
Yes.
Chrome, Half Machine Lip Moves over in San Francisco. That one's brilliant. And over in New York, some of the no-wave stuff like by James Chance and the Contortions. And even back to the UK, some stuff that, God, whether you can even call it post-punk, or some could call it industrial, some would just call it avant-garde experimental noise music, period. This Heat by This Heat. 20 jazz funk greats. Robin Gristle. A lot of jazz funk greats on there. Vibing Up the Senile Man Part 1 by Alternative TV. Mix Up by Cabaret Voltaire. Chance Meeting on a Dissecting Table of a Sewing Machine and an Umbrella by Nurse with Wound. More famous for that list, which came with the LP, of their influences, some of which people wonder if it was made up or not.
Sure.
But, that's an interesting world. Anyway, so in lieu of all of that, it seems bizarre that you would associate a group like Simple Minds with this collection. Life in a Day was released in 1979, their debut album. More importantly, the follow-up on the 1st of November 1979, Reel to Reel Cacophony. And our instinct of Simple Minds is, and this is our second piece of context, it's very easy to forget, as Simon Reynolds once mentioned in a blog post I've read of his, that Simple Minds are a case of U2, even more so than U2, because, the early Simple Minds is far more, I don't have any dislike toward the first two U2 albums, but the early Simple Minds is far more important than the early U2, though they both sold out in a similar way, to the point where Simple Minds are actually kind of derisively referred to as U3 in the mid-80s. Anyway, with a group like Simple Minds, you have these first two albums, and then the seminal, a very Euro-electronic release by a bunch of Scottish people who are trying to kind of claw their way outside of themselves on Empires and Dance, which is just absolutely extraordinary thing. The two LPs from 1981, Sister Feelings Call and Sons and Fascination, which was produced by Gong alumni Steve Hillage, as well as he also recorded some great solo albums of his own, including some early, 1978's early ambient and electronic music, the Green Album, among some other things. But he produced those two albums. They're kind of art rocky, but also they feel organic, a transformation from the Empires and Dance. And also we had some more accessible tracks, the single The American, and even more importantly, what I think might be their most infectious track of all time, certainly of the singles, Love Song, which is from those two releases. And then we had New Gold Dream. They're breaking out into an even more commercial direction, just very mainstream club dance music, plus very easy and accessible radio singles. Sparkle in the Rain's more in the arena rock territory, heavy on the synthesizers, but more about big rock bombast, inspired by the live shows they were doing at the time being so expansive that they felt as though there was no need for subtleties. And I'm on board with Sparkle in the Rain, but after that, Breakfast Club soundtrack participation, and then I can't remember, Alive and Kicking is the 85 album onward, they basically sold their souls to the devil, and it really taints the...
John Hughes, he's above himself.
Oh, John Hughes is horrible. We're never going to be discussing any John Hughes on FOTD. He's on the ban list.
Oh, I thought you were going to say on this show, because I don't know, one day I might get around to Yellow.
Okay, that's fine.
There's a John Hughes connection there, I suppose.
Anyway, so it's worth mentioning that the Simple Minds have this reputation which mars the potential quality of the early work, and it's worth considering that when discussing an album like Reel to Reel Cacophony here. I think it's a really fantastic, inventive, infectious, re-listenable item of the period. You want to listen to it over and over again and kind of figure out where they were going for on each track. This is John Leckie, who also produced Magazine, so right in the source of some of this creative work. And yet, there is something which does strike me as... It's a nitpick I have about Simple Minds. As exciting and as catchy and inventive, seemingly, as the music can often be, I can't help but feel that... And it's telling that they kind of... It's not like they were geniuses who went on to... just forget that they had any major talent or creativity to them. I genuinely think they were always doing what they thought would make them popular. I think it what their work did coincide with, well, one, a certain youthful audacity and arrogance, if you will, which lends oneself to thinking you're like some brilliant romantic poet, even though you're from Glasgow and you're going on a European tour. This is more, applicable to Empires and Dance, and so I don't want to get too into that aspect here, just because I know the lyrical, the subject matter of Empires and Dance far more. Just it's more in my mind, and I just simply more experienced with that one. But there is a certain. These albums were composed by guys from ages like 20 to like 25 to 26, 27, and I think they enter a stage after that, as a lot of people of that generation did, where it's like, okay, we were like, we're all arty and sort of, we had pretensions then, yeah, but you got to make money, it alienates people, art school, what were we thinking, the real world, and you kind of really dismiss interesting ideas of these stupid boomerisms of like, but then what are you gonna do with it? Like, that summarizes the entire existence of life on this planet. Like, it's insane to me. Anyway, this is getting stupid. No, seriously, I can't help but feel like Simple Minds were aping off of more effective groups and more creative and original groups who didn't sell out Magazine, Joy Division / New Order. I don't think we can ever claim New Order might have had some creative missteps, and but I don't think they ever truly sold out. World Cup song aside, they were football fans. Like, that's whatever.
Yeah, I think they just wanted to meet Bonzi or whatever.
Yeah, like, it is what it is, right? Like, he's in Do I Not Like That?
Yeah, he was like the star.
Yeah. God, that's funny. That's how I know him. Anyway, even on albums as interesting as Empires and Dance, New Gold Dream, you can point to, as we just did with Real to Real Cacophony / Life in a Day, other albums. I've done this on the channel with New Gold Dream when I have a video on that. God, you can point to heaps of albums from the same year that are more seminal and interesting and original, and it just feels like they're looking at what everyone else is doing and contributing their own, and they always work with brilliant producers such as Lecky or Hillage or Lily White on Sparkle in the Rain. There was this young guy named, of all the names you could be named, Peter Walsh. Seriously,
yeah.
on New Gold Dream, who was apparently this young, 19-year-old Scottish prodigy who was the one who was like, hey, Herbie Hancock, come in here and work on this. So they knew Herbie Hancock, somehow this guy was connected and experienced, and it's a great sounding album. And he doesn't seem to have much other credits. I don't know where this guy came from. Anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually.
But so I've just, as great as these albums are, however, if they disbanded after Sparkle in the Rain, this is superficial. I have to admit, I would be of the mind that, they were geniuses. And I probably would think that.
Well,
I think this is me trying to reckon with them having sold out and selling their souls to the devil. And I'll pause here and kind of come back to this later, perhaps. Go for it.
If you don't mind, it's a bit like what you're just saying there. Like, you mentioned once before you would have gone into those albums, you and I would have done a sample of the discography of Simple Minds.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
of the singles.
And they went grunge in the 90s.
Yes.
Don't kid me. They did. They legit. If you don't know,
a lot of people did.
Yeah, and so it's if you don't know that Simple Minds went grunge, look it up. It's strange. It's almost meme worthy, but no one knows. But
who wants to know?
And then yeah. Well, and they had more recent stuff that was synth wavy as well.
Oh yeah.
And so in a way, having known that prior to getting into the albums and stuff, you sort of already realize that they're
they come across as scene chasers a little bit.
Being observant, even like you were saying before, looking around at what's going on. And whereas perhaps if they didn't have that later stage career where you could see such obvious chasing, you might think that, that they're more of a genius sort of group, you were saying, because it would be a little less evident, or at least you wouldn't, sort of already have a sort of precedent for them doing that sort of stuff later on, so you can go back and see that in their other
I'm imagining, if John Fox had a bunch of sellout albums and he doesn't, he goes in the opposite of the commercial direction.
Yeah, he goes in the Eno direction.
Well, he retires for a bit, goes on hiatus, and then comes back doing ambient music.
Yeah.
So what if John Fox had like a career like the latter part of Kevin Ayers or something?
Sure.
Because we were discussing that a week ago.
Yeah. Well, I think
how that seems to mar like the reputation of him as like a Sid Barrett figure because Sid Barrett went away.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that though is, as far as my understanding is, he doesn't even remember making the albums.
Kevin Ayers.
Yeah, that's what he said in like when he's interviewed in the 90s or the 2000s. He has no memory of making those albums.
You're
so,
just stoned.
As in the later ones.
Oh, excuse me.
From like 77.
Oh, I misunderstood.
So like he was in a real down era and probably like heavily alcoholic, and he's like I was saying in that episode, he's just making these albums to sustain his livelihood.
Yeah, he did mention that, like drinking wine on a beach in India or something.
Yeah, and so he doesn't even remember making the albums. So he claims like he doesn't have memories. He's like, what? So that's pretty insane. Eh?
That is. That's grand.
But yeah. So I don't think he was being observant of anything, really.
Very true. Other than maybe what the record company was recommending him to.
Yeah, and probably, you hear
make nice music for the nice people.
And radios were everywhere back then, so he's probably just hearing soft rock on the radio and being like, oh, I'll just do that.
Great point. Yeah, that's what a lot of people did.
That's what so many of those artists did.
Including like, ELP, right?
Most of them probably more consciously, yeah. As opposed to him apparently completely unconsciously.
Yeah, well, lovely.
Which is a bit of a cacophony. Which, like speaking of this album, to just jump off that fun tangent, probably the thing I enjoyed most about this album, because I don't think they have some interesting songwriting chops on the albums after this one through to even like Sparkle in the Rain has some touches of interesting songwriting here and there. Yeah. Whereas this album is like a bit more. It's clearly earlier in their career, and they're similar to like early Ultravox in a way. Let's say they're just not quite as compelling songwriters yet.
Ultravox and the John Fox moment.
Yeah, like the first few albums, because they're similar to this. The most interesting thing about it to me is the experimentation with just the new synthesizer technology, because that's probably the best part of this album from listening to it, and I've only listened to it the once really, and heard a few songs here and there. But the sort of it's got the same synthesizers as say like the first YMO album, so it carries along this sort of like what would later become like video game music sort of sound font or whatever, and they actually use that in sort of little electronic experimentation sections in this album quite nicely. I actually prefer it when it's that rather than the more traditional songs, So yeah, just a sort of experimentation with the tech is something I can get behind on this album. But yeah, clearly, like what was the single you said?
Oh, which from this album?
Oh, I think that was from a later album, must have been.
Love Song in '81.
Yeah, that was another one you said. But I guess like the album, the songs on this album, especially early on, that are trying to be more sort of singly, they're those sort of front load out pop albums like this back then, aren't as strong as say like their later songs. I don't know. Is this like a fan favorite in the Simple Mind fandom, or is
the album,
or is this like a deep cut, real cacophony?
Well, I guess among the people who prefer the first few albums, it's probably considered a classic.
Yeah.
The only single released from this was Changeling.
Okay. But yeah, you see what I mean? Like, that's early on in the album, isn't it?
Changeling's like... Well, Changeling's toward the end. It's on side B, actually.
Oh, okay. And that's probably one of the funkier ones. I'll have to give it a couple more listens to be a bit more intimate with the album, say the track list. But on sort of like first impressions, it's... I suppose it's less like electro, though. It's a bit more in the new wave sort of vein of songs, right? But like I said, where they do the little touches of YMO or crowd rocky sort of experiments, that's the best touches of this album.
Yeah, I mean, my main draw to the album is as you're inferring, it is ultimately this production. Like, it's not like these songs as demos would be total revelation, right? Like, it's John
No.
It's John Leckie really bringing out the best in this group, as he had on the first album, and as he did, I think, even more successfully on Empires and Dance. But it's gotten to the point where I think why I give attention to Real Cacophony in particular is because we're at the point now where I think it's this. To me, it's the second most interesting release after Empires in Dance. Like, New Gold Dream is very fun and enticing pop music, and I think some of the best tracks on the 281 albums, the Sister Feelings Call, Sons and Fascination, very, very good. I think, yeah, as I said, Love Song's the finest of the singles. I think there are probably stronger deep cuts on, like, side B of Empires and Dance or New Gold Dream.
Sure.
That being said, or maybe even on this album, like some of the stuff like Veldt being presumably possibly a homage to Bradbury's short story famous text.
Oh, nice.
Just really interesting film theme.
Yeah,
just the idea of, like, you know, carnival.
The second side
factory.
of this album was definitely better.
Just super
more
cool.
interesting. Yeah.
And so, insofar as it's practice for Empires and Dance, and it's also them at their most viably, maybe it's viably experimental, because it is like there is a scene, as we were mentioning with all the other albums of this year, it's a scene at this time, and so they're contributing quite sincerely to an extraordinarily creative pool of bands and artists. I think it's one of the, like, would it be in the top 10 of the albums we mentioned, even of, like, the first set? Maybe not. Well, I don't even know if there was even 10 in that first set, but no, it looks like about 10. Like, maybe not, but it's fucking great, and I keep coming back to it. And like I say about the other, like, Empires and Dance might not be better than a bunch of other albums from 1980 in a similar context, New Gold Dream, but it's I come back to it partly because, and this is more apt for a discussion of Empires and Dance, I love the pretensions of Jim Coe's lyrics at this time. Well, at least not the lyrics as in, you know, reading them on a piece of paper, like they wouldn't, I'd just be like, whatever, but yeah, out of context, you know, but what it is in conjunction with the music, and like it's, I feel like it's like him reacting to, like, a European tour of, like, continental Western Europe at that time, you know, the Red Brigades, you know, protests, trains, electronic music, this strange sort of cold modernity, and like it's like he's embarking from these kind of snobby, nondescript suburbs, or in this case, kind of, you know, Glasgow. What's Glasgow in the context of, like, the history of, like, European culture? You're from, like, industrial Glasgow, and you're like, I'm going to be this poet, and it's just like, it's like, you know, going off to university from, like, a nondescript, boring Balladian suburb, and you're just like, yeah, I'm going to contribute to the canon, which includes the likes of John Keats and or Friedrich Nietzsche, and you know, and then you kind of equate the rock music you like into that, and it's just kind of, there's an awkward sort of attempt at cohesion there. Anyway, more apt to discuss that in an Empires and Dance program than a Real True Cacophony program. But I'll just pause here again for now and see if you've got anything else to share on Real True Cacophony. Just quick.
No, it's I guess it's just one I'll have to give a few more listens, because it does sort of warrant it. At least that second side, certainly. And I know Simple Minds albums, I'm not really, like, that into any one of them in a way. Like, they sort of need time to ferment, you know, for me, I suppose, familiarize myself with them a bit more, because I do like some of their sort of, like, songwriting chops, and like the bass lines on New Gold Dream, for example, are great. So they have great touches of, like, creative and, like, instrumentation here and there, definitely. But there's just something about the overall cohesive, like, the collective expression of Simple Minds just seems to not appeal to me in a way. I don't know what it is. It's because it's like there are things I just sort of can naturally find in a lot of the other synth bands that just seem sort of extremely appealing to me, like a certain sort of, like, quirkiness to OMD, let's say, or, like, Kraftwerk, along with the sort of, you know, nerdy tech ed sort of aspect of it, or the sort of, like, fantasy of YMO, or, like, the sort of what is actually, I guess, what Simple Minds are going for, like the telex thing, that sort of European sort of like austerity or something, or like Baroque austerity, some sort of weird thing like that, is a very sort of valid expression through synth pop, I feel.
Yeah.
Like each synth sort of band has their own sort of unique artistic vision. And I suppose, like we were alluding to earlier, maybe Simple Minds...
They're very composite.
Is composite, yeah, that's it, yeah.
That's part of why I like them, but it's also, that's the nitpick, I think, at the end of the
Sure,
day.
yeah, definitely. Or at least, for me, that's why they haven't just sort of reached out and grabbed me the way a few other synth bands have, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe it is something that'll just ferment over years, you know?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people had that experience with, say, like, Steely Dan back in the day.
Sure. I've been Steely Dan for years, wow, that's funny.
Yeah.
I was an 18-year-old who got into Steely Dan the moment I had Asia on an iTunes library and I downloaded it. And the moment Black Cow started, you wouldn't get out of here. It's like, yeah. Oh, I loved it so much. I still do, it's great stuff. Anyway.
And before you're a Doom fan, too.
So, yeah, long before, actually. Almost.
Because I can imagine...
Up to like 7-8 years before.
I could imagine like a Doom fan getting into Steely Dan.
Like Gastrolls.
Yeah.
But the one that the discussion about the composite sound and like the particular aesthetics of the sonics of Simple Minds and those other groups we were comparing them with, that leads well into the last thing I wanted to mention, which is discussing briefly the appeal of the sound which Real True Cacophony and some of those other Simple Minds albums belongs into. It's inspired by the industrial sheens of the surrounding urban landscapes of that time, and it's such an interesting moment, and it's kind of building into this new, it's like the West of Europe adopting via capitalism elements of like what was so derided about the Eastern Bloc, and learning this sort of dense existential reductionist sort of packaging of what it means to be, you know, a human being, and it becomes this like, you know, as 1984 approaches, the nations are starting to look a little closer to it. Just everything's grey and grimy, and all of a sudden it's like immediacy and urgency become the order of a lot of the music of the day. And I think this is part of the appeal of, it's a very kind of proto-cyberpunk and very I guess Balladian or post-Balladian pathological realization of landscape into recorded music, and it's such a, I think where this era ends, it's such an interesting era, and it feels very relevant and exciting now, perhaps because of the times, but I think it's important to note why this aesthetic seemed to dissolve, aside from, you know, it not being commercially viable as much as it was during the kind of initial punk 77 to 84, as far as like the wider post-punk and synth-pop goes, like this cold sound, you know.
Yeah.
I think it dissolves because I think there was...
And it's definitely...
People were more interested in escapism, I think, after a point, in this kind of above-ground pop and sort of... and all this kind of like funk and hip-hop style stuff, at least in the United States, did have sort of socially conscious leanings toward it, that they lent themselves to a crossover in terms of the fans, I feel, but also a lot of the kind of club and electronic music was about kind of infusing and potentially turning the system against itself, right? Like using the aesthetics and the kind of the psychological states of late capitalism and infusing them within this potentially is the key word, because a lot of it's just, you know, escape from, you know, being a yuppie or whatever, you go into have a rave or whatever, but you know, this idea that you could use these subcultures to re-engineer attitudes toward the more complacent society. Anyway, we're going off on a tangent and trying to assess the socio-political fevers of the mid to late 90s to the 21st century is perhaps more than at least an improvised sort of riffing is capable of. I feel as though. Oh
well, no, you could, but
I just prefer to write it all out beforehand and
that would have to be
and have it peer reviewed, etc.
Then that would have to be the main subject of the thing as well. So
yeah,
like,
rather than a spiel on what Simple Minds.
Yeah, though it is interesting. Like I've probably gone on like a few short tangents on that before, and then pulled the album back into it. And I think it's like you just did there, and I think it's a case of the significance of an album, you know, in one's own appreciation, to be able to think about the context of the music itself, how everything ties into some sort of, you know, sort of, maybe that was Simple Minds. It's interesting you mentioned composite. Maybe I couldn't quite see that before, because they are a composite of that zeitgeist, and they're very much expressed in that sort of, yeah, like all the adjectives you describe along the lines of Balladian, and, you know, the sort of punk atmosphere of late 70s England, where everything was a housing estate that's in this sort of like brutalist architecture, proto-cyberpunk sort of aesthetic.
It's interesting to note, like, K-Punk would write about how the early 80s was like this residue of the 70s, is like the UK saw it, like in the same way that prog was residue of the 60s in the early 70s, and so the 80s doesn't truly begin, the 80s as it's popularly known is kind of something that really it kind of conquers the world a bit later, you know, in like by 85, 86, I think there was a proposal that 85 was like the worst year ever in music or whatever.
Yeah. The singles on both the UK and US charts in the late 80s are awful. You go look at the like end of year charts and like what songs were number one and stuff like that, and it was a bad time for popular music. Though you can do that with any era, really.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, yeah, there was that fascinating soup of bands from that generation, 77, all inspired by punk outfits. And the primordial soup of all that, though, comes from the mid to late 60s. You know, people talk about Mersey Beat and the Beatles and the Stones and the Who.
Yeah.
But there's one band where if you took them out, things still would be, even with the Who, even with the Stones, and even with the Beatles, without the Kinks, things would still be very different. And it's interesting. How is it that this one band held one particular influence? I suppose you want to take it away.
Yeah, that's
with the Kink controversy.
Yeah, that is a pretty potent question, actually. I'm not too sure. I could, similar to the Simple Minds thing, I could probably rap and riff about that for a few hours.
Yeah, because it's worth mentioning. I just want to briefly say, like, it's if you take the Beatles out, it's obvious where the Beatles influenced, not just that. Well,
yeah, that goes without saying.
And the Stones and the Who, the heaviness and the loudness and the destruction of the instruments. But with the Kinks, it doesn't seem as obvious.
It's a bit more.
If you haven't listened to the music as much, it doesn't seem as obvious as those three groups.
Yeah.
And let's get into that now, I suppose.
Yeah. No. Sure. This. Yeah.
Whatever
no.
you like.
Yeah. Well, this album, I don't know. I guess because I did that T-Rex album last week, and so it just got me thinking of it. This sort of interesting idea of like a songwriter / band's like transitional album, you know, between two distinct eras that they're sort of well known for. And this album sort of falls into that one, and I used to like listen to the shit out of this album just because I was compelled by its sort of simple yet really interesting songwriting. And I got into it around the time I was going through and listening to like all the garage rock, pretty much.
Yeah.
And this album is such a mad combo of like that raw garage rock sort of, you know, sloppy, almost like lo-fi production. Like it doesn't sound, but then mixed with that sort of Merseyside interesting songwriting that you get from like, you know, Beatles originals from say the pre-psychedelic era and stuff. And this is definitely a pre-psychedelic album, though it does have sort of, the Kinks were pretty early to psychedelia, and you know, the more like melodic aspects of psychedelia and sort of strange like harmony things that all those bands sort of were doing. The Kinks were really early too. They're really early to like raga. On the album before this, there's like a raga song. But yeah, this album it's got to be one of my favorite garage rock albums, just because you get that sort of, you know, proto-grunge lo-fi garage riffing, but just on top of that you get all these hilarious sort of like, yeah, I don't even know where to begin. I suppose eccentric is a decent word to describe like Ray Davies' songwriting, but it's also very like progressive and very like wide-ranging in its influences. Like, you know how a Paul McCartney like music hall inspired song or like old-timey sort of track has a sort of corniness almost baked into it. Maybe he enjoys that sort of thing.
I think he does, yeah.
Whereas Ray Davies just does it in such a... It's a way that it's reinventing it. It's not homaging it in the way that Paul would often do. He sort of reinvents musical ideas, perhaps. He, and the whole band too, to be honest. Because obviously it's key that his brother is key to the sound of the band, you know, with the whole inventing heavy metal thing or whatever, by cutting the amplifier, one of the speaker things. So it's two brothers that are intrinsically sort of tied together, and they hate each other and stuff like that. And so you do always get that sort of manic, like, familial energy as well in the Kings. I do really appreciate that. And yeah, no, this album's just packed full of, like, just short, concise, really interesting songs. I suppose where they became more influential later might be similar to Syd Barrett, where they went on to inspire sort of songwriters in the indie rock sort of thing later on, from the 80s through to the 2000s. So, you know, whether they were from Portland or New Zealand, you know, those sort of underground songwriters, alt pop sort of stuff. And Twee as well were very much inspired by more like Ray Davies and Syd Barrett sort of stylings than, say, Pete Townsend or Paul McCartney. Because I suppose Pete Townsend's sort of similar when he does like homage type material. He wants to... He's not sort of transcending it in a way, he's more like doing it, playing that role.
It's almost like a Tommy the libretto. Hey guys, we can do it too.
I'm thinking of Tommy, because later on he does start to transcend that with more interesting
Quadrophenia's a lot better than Tommy is, I think a lot of people
exactly.
That's fucking great.
Quadrophenia has got... It's like, it comes...
I actually do like Tommy a lot, to be fair, but...
I suppose there was like a polarity shift around that time, because that's when Ray Davies is trying to do like theatrical stuff, and it's like really failing. And he's doing the bad homages and stuff. Because that's the other thing, the Kings fall off really hard. That's the unfortunate thing. Like they're
Simple Minds, but with the distinction being, if I may quickly say...
Yeah.
With the exception of the late 70s, briefly, the Kinks are never like... They're not... certainly for a bunch of the 70s, like, I don't know if we can say they're scene chasing. Like, who is that music for? For a while there in the 70s. I know, like, people talk about when they broke into the American market with, like, you know, the era, like, I Want to Fly Like Superman, some of those singles and albums, and the live release was quite popular over in the States. But I almost get the feeling that that's kind of...
from the States at that time.
Oh, yeah, for like a long time, right?
For quite a while. I'm not sure when they lifted the band.
Probably around then, right?
When they changed their sound, I'm pretty sure. When they moved to that arena rock sort of sound. Because they're allowed back in the States, you know.
I also wonder if that was just, given the technology, like, that's probably the sound they kind of would have wanted to do anyway in the 60s, because they pioneered it.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just a matter of,
and that's why
let's
they
just
went,
do this.
That's
like,
why they went back to it as well, yeah.
Yeah, like,
I think there was earnesty in it.
Like, I could, yeah, like, I feel like it just... That may not even be scene chasing. That may just be them coinciding with what was popular at the time. And it's not like they went like full disco or full anything. They were still just the Kinks doing their harder rock sound.
It was also a bit like Beach Boys as well. You know, when they would tour and like throughout their whole career from the after the 60s onward. Where they were pretty much doing the like retro circuit or whatever.
Oh, point. Yeah.
So I think the Kinks were also a bit that. But I think they did cross over with a younger fan base as well around that time. Probably because of the Van Halen cover. That would have helped.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You got me. God,
But, you can talk about the Kinks forever, because there's just so much good stuff to listen to. Like, this album, man, like, every song's a good song, pretty much. So, like, I don't think there's a weak cut, to be honest. Even though some songs are way more compelling than others, obviously. Because there are some, like, the best songs on this. Like, even David Bowie thought there was something really interesting about Where Have All the Good Times Gone.
As did Van Halen a bit later on.
Yeah, they also covered that one too, yeah. Because that's just an all-time classic. I always love the I'm on an Island song as well. I don't know what that is. Like, it's like it touches of like Tropicala or like Caribbean music or something. It's I suppose Ray Davies was also doing strange world music, or like English former colony music, you know, little touches of the empire everywhere. He was a sort of one of those old-timey worldly Englishmen, the English gentleman.
Oh, man. Maybe I also just talk about the record briefly. So my thing with the Kinks is they definitely released two godly classics in The Something Else and in Village Green.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm. Some people put the drop off as after like Muswell Hillbillies or something. Like I could never get into like the album. Like Arthur kind of escapes me a little bit, as does Lola, and yeah, Muswell Hillbillies. Like obviously everything afterward. But I can appreciate the two albums I mentioned, and also I think Face to Face is the one right before something else. Right?
Yeah.
Face to Face is certainly good.
That's a good album as well. Yeah.
And then the King Controversy is right before Face to Face. Look, I do like this album. I've never really listened to it. I've also listened to it a while ago, like back in high school maybe, when I had a lot of Kinks albums on my iTunes, and that's when I grew to realize like, most of this is kind of not great, to be honest.
Oh yeah, because they got so many albums.
Yeah, quite a few. Because I just was able to just download the discography relatively easily. So because you did that with a band you liked sometimes. And the songs from the '60s I thought were fantastic. So but that's the thing. There's really kind of just a brief period there, as we talked about. So there's no reason to get into the stuff after the '60s. But I think I would sooner go to like a Sonics album than this if I wanted to hear like kind of the garage sound from the time. And the English sound is better realized on like the next two or three, obviously, and like it's definitely a really good album. I couldn't imagine going back to it all that much though, to be honest, which is weird. Considering as you mentioned, you go back to it all the time, or like quite a lot.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I will compliment about this band, it's a major thing to state potentially, is the Beatles sound like they're homaging an American thing. The Stones certainly do. There's a certain Britishness about both of them, but they're taking an American thing and making it their own, and obviously so are the Who. The Kinks are the only one of those four. It's as though rock and roll was invented in Britain.
Yeah.
With the Kinks, and one of the great quotes about any band was when someone said like one of the Fall songs was like, if rock had been invented, like River Thames instead of River Delta Mississippi, and it's like, the Fall do sound like, it's like rock and roll's invented in like northern England or something.
Sure, yeah.
And I would say the same thing about one of their contemporaries, the Swell Naps, as well.
The Fall love the Kings.
And I also sometimes have that compliment about like even like Led Zeppelin, they're more brand of heavy rock or early heavy metal. Like sometimes that's like Led Zeppelin 4. It's like, wow, if rock and roll was invented in England, somehow, or if the pioneers of rock and roll kind of were magically transported to England and then lived out the rest of their lives there, and the next generation sounds like Led Zeppelin or something, but no, anyway, so the Kinks have that interesting quality about them. And what else is fantastic about the Kinks is that you mentioned it, the very distinct guitar sound of the time, most likably applied in one of my favorite Kinks songs, which is on Village Green, Picture Book, dun 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 dun.
Oh yeah,
that's a very beautifully demonstrative of the Dave Davies sound, and how the rhythm section applies kind of replies to it.
It sounds like three acoustic guitars laid on top of each other. That's a very particular sound.
Yeah, I mean, Davies in his prime was just. People talk about Waterloo Sunset, and it's worth all the hype. But the Davies song that makes me think of like this like genius in his early 20s, and people talk about McCartney in that way. And like, sure enough, McCartney wrote songs like For No One in his early 20s, and like I'm Looking for You, In My Life, or with Lennon, excuse me, and obviously Lennon with like songs like I'm Only Sleeping, She Said, at a very relatively young age. Jagger and Richards have been young, doing stuff like Under My Thumb and Lady Jane, Painted Black. So the most impressive thing is almost young Ray Davies doing like a young man doing such a wise and touching song like Do You Remember Walter, which is the second track on Village Green.
That's a great song.
One of the most touching pieces of recorded music. Doesn't seem to get mentioned enough. I'm sure the fans of people who say that the Kinks are better than the Beatles, I'm sure they talk about that song all the time.
Yeah, that's a fan favorite. Yeah,
but like it's so, because it's the second track on the album, and if you played it so many times, especially as a young person, it would stick with you forever. And as a young person, and I listened to it in my late adolescence, so you're relatively young, obviously. It haunts you, like, oh my god, like you kind of get a perspective vision of the future, and it helps you come to terms with that potential future in an interesting way. It's like the depressing song which kind of gives you sort of a wise antidote existentially to the potential scenario, unlike coming about like potentially OK Computer and a lot of that emo claptrap in the 2000s.
Yeah.
But no, this is a good album. I remember listening to it this morning and thinking like, oh, I don't know if I would call this a classic for me, but like, it is very good, and like it's thoroughly worth placing in one of these big museums of recorded, like the LP museum, rock music or any genre. If you have your Kinks section, place it there. Do you need any albums after, say, even despite my own prejudices, put like something like Arthur in there? You kind of have to, just because it's one of the earlier rock operas. Same year as Tommy. But those are essentially my thoughts on the Kinks / this particular record here.
No, you definitely have a picture in the Kinks Museum. Or it would have its own wing if it's a large museum, for it being that sort of transitional album.
For something as a larger topic as what we're kind of talking about, it would be an enormous museum.
I think this is also the first Kinks album with like out of cover as well, like all original songs.
No, cool.
I think, so they were leaning more into that sort of songwriting as well. Whereas most of those English bands that were doing the sort of blues thing in the early to mid 60s were mostly doing covers. And most garage rock is covers as well.
Yeah.
A lot of garage rock.
No, that's it's interesting about, and that's because the Stones were quite blues influenced, and the Beatles are certainly into harmonies and kind of homaging American rock and roll of the 50s. Whereas like there is something about the Kinks that was very kind of songwriter focused in a manner that was guitar troubadour oriented. Like McCartney likes his piano songs, and John Lennon likes a bit of kind of it's almost like he wanted to be like one of those great American folk art, like kind of these yearning very personal songs, and whereas someone like Davies, there's almost this convicted insistence that this little pop rock tradition had the seriousness of English troubadours. Because John Lennon's famous for saying like he thinks there was no good English music until Cliff Richard. So I think that there is a certain degree to which Lennon had more of a liking toward those sort of melancholy American music by the likes of, I mentioned Dylan, but also like I think of a lot of vocal jazz instead of soul music, which Lennon was drawn to.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of that very personal sort of, I think about like the I'm Only Sleeping. I think of him writing like Nowhere Man. Like this is like more of a certain American song tradition. I mean, obviously the English tradition, like Lloyd, he grew up with that too, but what he aspired toward was something like that. But Davies is more sincerely, I think, oriented with just based upon his later, his doing Village Green seemed like not the thing to do in swinging 60s London. Like it wasn't a commercial success at the time, so clearly he that's where his heart was. That's kind of proof he wasn't a scene chaser in a way. It was his best album.
Yeah, well, and it's tied into a sort of concept as well, the Village Green, and a sort of like Luddite yearning, and similar to those Lennon songs you mentioned, like sort of touch of melancholia as well.
Oh, definitely that. Like, not to say that Davies doesn't go there.
Because like you were mentioning Walter, or even Waterloo Sunset has those sort of touches. Or another one off Village Green, Big Sky.
Ooh.
That's very sort of melancholic. That's sort of like a rumination on the existence of God in a more sort of artistic way than, say, the XTC has an equivalent.
Dear God, yeah.
Yeah. Which isn't as quite as eloquent, let's say.
Yeah. It's certainly true to say, though, as you were mentioning, definitely, the Kinks / Ray Davies songwriting had a rather... It did cast a large shadow over American troubadours who were inspired by English music. And not that there hasn't been English indie songwriters inspired by Ray Davies since then, but that 2000s moment of indie rock was you know, like there's some UK groups, but definitely a lot of American groups in there too.
Yeah.
And so this
And
sound
they
of
love
American,
the UK classics as well.
yeah, like you think of like, you know, the Modest Mouse, for example, or Interpol.
Yeah, yeah.
All you know, American acts, and we were talking about a Wolf Parade, Canadian, but North American.
Yeah, yeah.
And
similar.
yeah, like yeah, groups in this fold, and so it became like this sort of interesting, kind of proud, identifiable American genre of the 2000s. You know, moving into Animal Collective, neo psychedelia, let's say, definitely inspired by British music.
Yeah, certainly by the UK classics.
And you know, such a potent and beloved genre, and really made all the more kind of canonized by the fact that one of the premier geniuses of American recorded music today and electronic sonics in this world at this moment, Travis Miller, known as Lil Ugly Mane, most well known perhaps for 2015's Oblivion Access, which contained what was it called? Preserve and Collapse and Appear, which was, well, I claimed at one point, I still might, the song of the 2010s. Just ridiculously good. And what was his follow-up to this? Oh, actually, no, his most well-known release was probably the initial 2012 Mr. Fug Isolation, but the one that's prominent in my mind is Oblivion Access, which has similar adulation surrounding it, to be fair. And as does, and what an odd follow-up, to go from the album 2015, 6 years on, we come out with here, Volcanic Bird Enemy and The Voiced Concern. You can see it here right now. What's going on? What's going on? Is this from Sesame Strat? No. What we have here is...
What country was Sesame Strat?
Germany.
Yeah.
It's German Sesame Street.
That's the funniest shit.
Yeah, if someone's like falling asleep and like, you know, getting a bit, you know, kind of, you know, loopy, you decide just bring up your, you know, computer or you know, your laptop, presumably it's portable, or your tablet, smartphone to them, show them a clip of like Sesame Strat and just have them, they think they're falling asleep and they're having a weird dream. It's exciting, it's amusing, I think. Anyway, so how strange it is that Lil Ugly Mane explores neo-psychedelia, indie rock, or maybe we ought to call it indie-tronica. That's a designated genre now.
Sure.
And
I don't know, I think that happened in the 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, very peculiar that he would go in this direction, but it does seem organic. Not that there's no traces of the hip-hop of his earlier albums.
No, it's a pretty natural blending, actually.
It's a remarkable archaeopteryx of recorded music.
What's Archaeopteryx?
Archaeopteryx was the dinosaur. It was like it was capable of flight, but it had feathers. It's used as an example of a missing link.
Okay.
I was being a bit smarmy there.
Oh, between birds and dinosaurs.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Between humans and apes.
No, they cut that from the Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
There was a scene where they wanted to have a human-ape hybrid, but they decided that would be... They did screen tests of someone in like the makeup, but they cut it from the finished film because they figured that'd be too shocking for audiences. I don't know how they would have shoehorned that in anyway. It would have just existed for the sake of being shocking, which is, you know, whatever, is what it is. But no, to talk about Lil Ugly Mane here, one of the more acclaimed albums of 2021, and whilst I'm not as compelled by this one as I am Oblivion Access, just to get that on our record here, it all the same, it is absolutely fascinating that you get, I mean, I don't know if, I guess you could say mainstream for Lil Ugly Mane, but I guess it's more of a critical adulation. I don't know how many, you know, people who just consume the music on the charts really know or care who Lil Ugly Mane is. But it's in this world of, God, I don't even know if you can, I guess you can still call it world of idiosyncratic experimental hip-hop, but it's kind of just falling into art pop in general at this point. It's everything I'm liking about some of the more liked and popular trends in at least kind of maybe music snob oriented OIM world. They're all bundled into here. It's easy to see why this is such a beloved album, and it's kind of a great totem of a lot of what I am liking about this sort of... I like that there's this kind of snob-oriented discourse which is informed by the history of popular and beloved music canons, because they can they can enable the existence of things like this and things like this being popular. Because, like, even if it means something like this having to become a bandwagon first, at least people then listen to it. It's not like people wouldn't care about something like this if it was from a first-time artist.
Well, that's how the post-punk scene and all the bands you mentioned in the preamble to this video, that was all the same mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, it was the same thing. There was the snobbery section of...
Yeah, and you kind of wanted to be in on that to kind of feel like what those guys were feeling. Because, like, oh, wow, I want to be on that level. Not even in a societal sort of status sense for some people, maybe. But it's almost like you wanted to feel what they were feeling.
No, like it is now. It's still social, yeah.
Yeah, but I do feel like there is as much as there is sort of a, you know, vaguely hierarchical thing about it.
Naturally.
There is something very... I think there's also something more genuine and... where you see people like talking about like these enormous feelings they had for a piece of art, and you kind of want in on that. You want to know what that's like, you know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of very. There's something very harmonious about that. It's not even necessarily, especially in the context of the internet. I mean, what credibility is there for profile on a fucking music rating website, really, at the end of the day? There's nothing really tangible about it.
No,
So,
the best part of it are, like, people's weird anecdotes in reviews. I like them more than people actually reviewing it, to be honest.
Yeah, like, and you'd think that's the logical preference.
Yeah.
I mean... I'm going to talk about some other acclaimed albums from 2021, just to briefly get... This is, like, the top 10 of... And, like, it's a really fucking... Like, oh God, like, I compared this to whatever the 90s or 2000s or even 2010s would be. Like, seems way more exciting to me than, like, the average... There's some stuff here I don't even care for. There's, like, maybe... Okay, so... It's accompanied by... I've said before, I'm not the biggest JPEG Mafia fan, and so this album here, which is called LP exclamation mark, I wasn't that taken by it, but, like, you know, like, I appreciate that, you know, it's trying, but the highest rated album of the year is something called, it's considered labeled experimental hip-hop. I mean, I don't think it's as interesting as other stuff, or as experimental as other stuff, labeled experimental hip-hop, but, you know, at least that idea is in the discourse there.
Yeah,
This notion that experimental hip-hop is, like, a desirable label.
Sure.
That's only going to produce positive results, I feel, in a very, almost in a, I don't know, is this Pavlovian the right term? I don't know, in a behavioural sense. You know, it'll potentially catalyse latent creativity. Next, you've got Sometimes I Might Be Introvert by Little Sims. I quite like that album. It's maybe not, I wouldn't think it's something I would necessarily enjoy, but production, but even the kind of the emotional palette of it is really gripping, I think.
It's like Bjork's Divorce album.
Oh yeah, I like Bjork a lot, actually, yeah. So that was not a piece of surprise. By the time I get to Phoenix Injury Reserve, I mean, what a major work that is. This is interesting. It was cool that I've only listened to this once, and it was pretty cool. I'd probably need to listen to it at more times and hang out on or with the ceiling. Floating Point's Pharaoh Sanders and London Symphony Orchestra release called Promises.
Oh yeah, that was a big album. Yeah, from like 21. You said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At 5, we've got our Volcanic Bird Enemy in the Voice Concern, Little Ugly Mane. Nice. I could never get into this next act here, Black Country New Road, for the first time. It just feels like it's... Remember when K-Punk accused Sonic Youth of just the kind of curation rock? This is fucking curation rock. Like, it exists, and it's Black Country New Road. It's not Sonic Youth.
Yeah, also the Radiohead's new band, that's also curation.
I agree. That's boring as fuck. And I like Radiohead. My 2 favorite Radiohead albums are the last 2.
The Smile, that's what it is.
But The Smile is like... I was never into Tom York solo stuff, so maybe I'm just a Johnny Greenwood fan, because like Johnny Greenwood's scores.
He's not in The Smile?
Or maybe he is. I don't know.
I think he is.
Shame Johnny, because the Phantom Thread music is some of the best film music of the 2010s.
Sure.
He's fantastic.
Don't take my word for it, but I think that it's pretty much the same lineup, I swear.
And we're going to find that out now. Oh, Johnny's in it.
Yeah, I thought
Tom, Johnny, and Tom Skinner, who's a different drummer than the drummer in... I think Phil Selway's the drummer in Radiohead.
Okay.
So yeah, it's different. Formed 2020, Oxfordshire, UK. A lot of interesting things happen there. Bands like The Smile formed there. Riveting.
But yeah, something like Little Ugly Mane is definitely not curation rock. Or like, even curation music. It's like similar to a few other sort of picks that you and I have both made as far as albums go, where like it's sort of the genre bending sort of music, you know, and it's like it's interesting that the sort of different directions like the groups like this will take, or even like you mentioned before, groups like Animal Collective, and you know they sort of always bring a different sound to every album, and so like this guy is like you feel artists like this are just using they want to like use their influences and transcend them and create something original out of all their influences. Maybe similar to what we were saying just before about Ray Davies, you know. And this album is definitely a case of that, because the way it blended the sort of like indie rock music with that sort of hip hop was just like it's been done in ways that aren't tasteful, but like often it's probably most done in ways that are sort of just a bit cringy, but like there's nothing cringe about this. It's just so seamless, such a natural blend of sort of disparate sounds and influences, and very effective at it as well. Like this is definitely an album I'll have to listen to a few more times, because it's very compelling. It's good stuff.
I'd like to just quickly round out the top 10 for that 21 as chosen by the RYM users. There's the next 4 picks. I'll just demonstrate what an interesting time the 2020s are thus far, something that year at least. You've seen Get Ready by Lingua Ignota, Call Me If You Get Lost by Tyler, the Creator. I mean, he got in a more interesting direction with those 2 albums, like Igor and the one before that, Flower Boy, in the later 2010s, but this is the most interesting of them, Call Me If You Get Lost. People talked about Earl Sweatshirt getting in an interesting direction for a moment there in 2018 with some rap songs, which is pretty good, but there's stuff after that I think a lot of people think isn't as interesting. I'm inclined to slightly agree, actually, from what I've sampled of it at least. Mercurial World by Magdalena Bay, that's very good. Apparently, that's like an electronic album. It's called Synth Pop and Dance Pop here. From what I understand, they were done by prog guys. It was done by guys who were in a prog band.
No, I've heard that one. That's a good album.
Yeah, really good stuff. And a prog band here, avant prog, as they say. Cavalcade by Black Midi. We're definitely on board with Black Midi.
Yeah, they're cool. Definitely, yeah.
21. Good times, and one of the contributions to
like
21
prog meets The Fall, meets like 2000s indie rock.
One of the contributions to 21 and / 2020s being great times is Little Ugly Mane's Volcanic Bird Enemy and The Voiced Concern. And I'd like to quickly, just briefly note that there is a Little Ugly Mane album release after this, 2023 singles. I've heard it, and I remember liking it. I didn't find it as compelling as either, certainly not as I mentioned, Oblivion Access, but as Volcanic Bird Enemy. Although I probably need to, I'll listen to it a few more times. This one's main genre listed in bold is slacker rock, and something like that, I guess.
Oh man, I'm gonna love it.
I've never gotten into the 2012. His first album, Mr. Thug Isolation, has escaped me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
Mr. Thug Isolation sounds like the name of a rap album from like the Boondocks. Or
Point. And Mr. is spelled Mista.
Yeah, well, of course.
I shouldn't have had to mention that.
It's definitely implicit.
Yeah, and then of course Free-Sided Tape Volume 1 and Volume 2 and Third Side of Tape, all very, very good. And then that's when you had Oblivion Access after that in 2015. Little Ugly Mane, one of the coolest and most interesting artists right now, and I have videos on, as in Cosmic Criticism pieces on Oblivion Access and on this album as well. Go check out the Oblivion Access one for my kind of extended thoughts on that, and the kind of, that's probably the Cosmic Criticism where I most maybe effectively got into the what happened to the future speculation, and so go there if you want to see if I said anything coherent there. I may have at one stage. That would be interesting. And I'm going to move on from Little Ugly Mane for now, because I knew where to start, but I don't know where to continue.
Sure. Well, no, there's a lot to say, definitely. And in a genre that's sort of very, very postmodern, like experimental hip-hop's getting at the moment, the sort of like spasmodic incoherence is almost ingrained into the appreciation of said music, in a way.
I certainly feel that. I don't know, it's a valid way of appreciating something.
Well, definitely. It's similar to like the sort of abstract musings and ad-libbings of, what would say, like Cities of Viv, or even like those Mark Kozilek albums, you know, just drawing weird, like, you know what this music reminds me of? Like, I was thinking about it today in relation to that Lunch in the Park album.
Yeah.
It's like if someone came along and declared, like some critic, compared the album to Marcel Proust, then like it would suddenly be a classic, not like two on like the RYM or something. And like that just
That's all it would take,
that led me to think like all this sort of music is almost downstream of that like Proustian idea of like imagery leading to like memory recovery and like appreciation from like earlier, like say childhood and things
it's
like
really
that.
given the emphasis on nostalgia in the modern age.
Yeah, definitely.
In the past, and like that kind of proposed late 20th century Arcadia,
and
prior to events like
it's like
9/11 / GFC / social media.
It's like a cross-sensory phenomenon, you know?
COVID.
Sure. But yeah, I don't know. I feel that it's sort of Proustian, and so it's almost arbitrary when you think about music criticism, because all it would take is a critic at some renowned publisher to have a take like that and just label it Proustian, and now it'll be a classic, you know?
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what I personally believe. This sort of postmodern style of song creation, the kind of is downstream of this sort of hip hop, which I think is where even Kozilek was getting a lot of his inspiration.
It does come across that way, like
as well as reading like modernist things and his own nostalgia or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a very new sort of common cutting edge songwriting style.
Yeah.
It's very fresh, and it's sort of, its incoherence is part of the key. You know, it's sort of with the information overload sort of trope. You know.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
And yeah, it's key to music like this certainly. As opposed to, say, if you want to get into my next pick, harkens back to
I was hoping we would.
to a more quaint sort of time, you know, where you don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. Even though there are certainly political existentialisms and emotional ones, but it's less abstract.
Yeah.
It's more direct, you know.
There's almost something kind of liberating about the fundamental gravity of existence being the title of this record, Survival.
Yeah, survival of the fittest. I gotta get with it. Yeah, the OJs, man. Do you know how I first got into this album? It's from such a weird source. There was like an NBA show I'd watch every once in a while back in maybe like 2017, 2018, called like Jalen and Jacoby. And it was the intro, they'd say, "What do we give the people?" And then they'd start playing the opening track on this album, and I'm like, man, what's this funky bass line? And so I look up the song, and I'm like, oh, the OJs, okay, the Love Train band. Like, I knew the song Love Train when I was a kid. And so it's like, that's a goofy, like, post-hippie classic. And so I was like, oh, wow. I just decided to listen to the whole album and listen to a few more of their albums, and I was like, it's weird that this band that seems sort of fairly like superficial and mainstream, you know, have such a, at the same time as like fulfilling that sort of mainstream, almost like light entertainment sort of niche. There's like a weird like hard edge to it. It's not the same hard edge that you get out of, say, like a James Brown, even, who he rides that line, or like more so say Sly Stone after you know, the Stand, which is very like sort of mainstream. You get, you know, that harder edge sort of like deep groove funk, whereas these guys are more like that Philly soul sort of end of like funk and soul. Because I think it's mostly three singers. It's like these three singers and some guy who spearheads the band, who like, he was some industry guy. I think he did I think he might have been the same guy who made the Temptations go psychedelic. And he also had a few other bands that were never quite as big. But yeah, I think the OJs was like the project of some like producer guy. So all their albums are like his productions and stuff like that. And I think he even wrote the songs or had like songwriting teams and shit like that.
Yeah.
And so they're mostly centered around like these three amazing singers and like a George Martin sort of thing, you know. And so it's just sort of, yeah, you get this very like clear, almost like George Martin, I'm evoking the Beatles, sort of like mainstream music, but at the same time with this sort of ethereal, like weird sort of spacey, like not only sentiment but sonics as well. Like the opening track on this album is like a hard funk bop, but then you have all these weird like the second track, "Let Me Make Love to You," is like very classic Philly soul. That's like Me and Mrs. Jones, that sort of thing. You know, this very orchestral, big band sort of soul music. But then they go back to like sort of funk for a few more songs, but and then back to the sort of Philly soul again. And I just love how just sort of the funk songs aren't, like I was mentioning before, the hardest edge funk songs, but like sometimes this sort of music, like Me and Mrs. Jones, Philly soul can be a bit sort of like cheesy,
sentimental,
very sentimental, and like I was saying, it's very like it's aimed at a very mainstream audience. But I love how like this album has what's the production, Where Did We Go Wrong? It's just like one of these like most beautiful productions I've ever heard. It's like psychedelic soul at its best. This sort of desert spacey like thing, and then when you mix the sentimentality in with that, it works really well. It doesn't come across as cheesy. Whereas much of this sort of stuff can. So that's why I love the OJs. They're able to ride that line between cheesy and earnest, tasteful in such a fascinating way. And man, this album is, like I mentioned, it's very like easily accessible. Like when I was walking around listening to it the other day, the song "Rich Get Richer" was playing, and some guy across the street, it was just some gardener, he's like, "Yeah, man, the best thing I've ever."
Nice, fantastic.
It's just like crowd pleasing music, you know. And this album, like it's the sort of album, when I saw it, it was at a record store for like $20. I'm like, I'm definitely buying this. It's just such a fun listen. It's probably the OJ's best album as well. Like Backstabbers is pretty good, and then the one after that, I think it's called Ship Ahoy.
Yeah,
that's pretty good as well.
Received, yeah.
Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. Those three, like I don't know, they fall way too hard into the cheesiness later on.
They have a lot of albums. It's 31 albums.
Oh man, they got so many albums.
They've it's from quite a few in the later 70s, and then there's a number in the 80s, handful in the 90s and 21st century as well.
Let me put it this way: the part of their discography I seem to be most interested in is when they're like harkening off the progressive soul era.
Yeah.
I think they're like 3 albums that are really good contributions to it, whilst also being like, you know, it's not funkadelic or there's a riot going on. So it's music that's very accessible for everybody. Like you can play it for kids, you can play it for your parents, you can play it for gardeners, and everyone will love it. So yeah, that's sort of why I listened to this album quite a bit and picked it for the show.
Well, yeah, no, I really enjoyed this album. I if you've played it, I may have heard it before, but otherwise,
I've played the record a bunch of times.
Yeah, if that's the case, then it's probably in the back of my mind somewhere. But I thoroughly enjoyed this, and the tracks that stuck out to me the most were tracks like Survival and Rich Get Richer.
That's a great song.
But even
and Rich Get Richer, yeah.
You know, but all in general, really great production, just really gratifying funk/soul of that period. What was good about it? This very expansive production. And what's good about it's not just a case of like I rather like the Roots album, but I dare I say, I don't know if this is like a bit of sacrilege. I'd rather listen to something like this than that, just because not to say that the best of Curtis Mayfield is less desirable to listen to than this. Like the best of Curtis Mayfield's like better than most stuff, to be fair. But something like this is just like almost feels like a fuller album experience, whereas Roots feels like a series of attempts at like a similar song. It's a good song, but like I feel like it blends together a little bit for me, whereas I feel like the tracks on here are more distinct.
Oh yeah.
And I think I prefer the harder production on this. Like I know like Roots feels quite orchestral by comparison.
Sure.
And I mean I'm more of a George Clinton Palmer. That's one of my favorite like mainstream albums of the 70s. So like this is closer to that in terms of the sound of it.
Yeah. Well, they try and do the Bootsy Collins bass lines, like the opening tracks.
And you mentioned the Sly albums. Like those are pretty killer.
Yeah.
I remember I really like. I would say I prefer of the Roots was, I think, the second of the soul albums he just brought up on the program. Well, I remember
I would
the
have
first
Bobby
one was
Womack.
Bobby Womack, and I prefer Understanding as well, because Understanding is
Oh,
really
that's-
full, personal sort of. When you said the covers like 2010s hip hop, mid 2010s
Yeah,
hip hop release,
totally.
so is the content. They're very kind of confessional
Oh.
subject, and obviously he takes some cover songs and makes them his own, but they're. That's
No,
what
I'm
I
glad
said
it's not
about
just
that,
me.
yeah.
I think that album's like a
It's
lost
very, very
classic.
good.
Yeah.
I don't know his other work, his other LPs as well, but like I think it's more than just.
That's why I picked it for the first show.
It's strong.
He has a bunch of other good, he has better songs on other albums as well, but as one sort of piece, Understanding's definitely a lost classic.
I remember thinking, even looking back, like it's just a bizarre piece of novelty trivia maybe, but the 5 albums you picked on that first Mandala episode, sorry to break the fourth wall of Montgomery Custard,
Yeah.
but my favorite of them is China Crisis, but Understanding's my second
It's a
favorite.
good album. Yeah.
That's the one that's stuck with me the most since then of those 5. Also, other than China Crisis, as you know, because I've been singing some of those songs.
Sure. But yeah, no, Understanding's
need sympathy.
No, yeah, that's a...
Try.
But, I can't just pull lost classics out of my ass every week, so sometimes I go for just one I like Survival,
Well, if you learn to, you'll be more than welcome on this show. But that sounds painful.
No, it would be. That'd be... Because it's a very big square.
And CDs are kind of, it's pointy.
There's
right?
glass!
Well, even if it's in the casing, it's just like...
I'll keep shitting ethereal MP3s, that'll be a bit better.
Well, yeah, presumably. Survival by the OJs, and very enticing. I imagine this is the kind of thing where if you saw it on a YouTube upload or in the LPs in the racks, you'd want to get it just based upon like, oh, this looks like some trippy thing, and especially in the days before you could go, I better check to see if it has good ratings on the internet. It does have good ratings on the internet.
Does it?
Oh, 3.45 is pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's pretty good, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I can't be bothered checking Wikipedia right now, even though I've.
Yeah, it's
Still
not
disagreeing,
considered
so
like a classic.
I don't know how
or
exciting it
whatever.
would be for the show. But no, I have a positive reception to this album, very much so.
Yeah, it's good.
I listened to it back to back with acclaimed classic King Controversy, and I had a better time with Survival, which isn't just. This is just me. This is not like saying what brought more to music or whatever.
Well, it's a more fun album.
There you go, yeah, sure.
Because like the King Controversy is very personal songwriting. It's more like an indoors album.
Plus, it's a bit of everything. It goes through a bunch of different genres.
Yeah,
It goes from like
yeah.
the garage rock opening track to something that's more idyllic in English.
Yeah.
Something you mentioned, even the tropical song on there.
Yeah, it's pre Sgt. Pepper's. sort of
Yeah,
thing.
but I will say, well, back in Controversy, it's very God, it's very much people's idea of 1965 England, and, which is to say, it influenced our idea of the zeitgeist tremendously.
Whose idea, sorry?
The collective consciousness, because I reckon if you
Oh.
played the Controversy for people, sorry to go back to that one, people would be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I would expect music from that era to sound like in the UK. Yeah, bit of guitar, rock, bit of English idyllic, bit of this and that, and so they just to say, they stamped their place in that zeitgeist and just have influenced our perception of it since then. Because anyway. And on record anyway, the Survival by the OJs, yeah, as I said, good stuff here. And anything else, and to move back to you, unless because you might want to share something else about the OJs?
No, Survival, check it out.
Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more heady here, I suppose, and we're kind of going to go do a cross analysis between the times of then and the times of now. On the 20th of February 1974, that was the first day you could have had in your home a copy of the LP Phaedra by Tangerine Dream. And you listen to this sort of thing, and you literally can only imagine what it would have been like listening to something like this. Maybe you're familiar with the previous Tangerine Dream albums, maybe not. And I think even if you were, you'd be experiencing some a kind of music which, well, it was appropriate that when Brian Eno, he coined the term ambient music, which was a term that was coined after the existence of the release of this album and early Tangerine Dream, quite obviously. When Brian Eno coined the term ambient music, I believe he did, or at least has been a lot since then, but I'm sure he did. it's easy for me to potentially merge two memories together. Invoke the very genius turn of the century, that is 19th to 20th, Eric Satie, French composer who composed many brilliant, interesting, what we'd call minimal works on piano, not in the sense of mid 20th century classical minimalism, but probably inspirational to some extent. Satie composed a little like this school of composition. Well, maybe not school. It was kind of sort of just his own, I suppose, because you just be kind of knocking him off. It's known as furniture music. What's furniture music? Furniture music was meant to supplement the living situation of a modern home at that time. It was meant to be played with dinner and accommodate the sort of sounds that would occur during conversation or cutlery hitting the plate as such. It was music that was intended to expand or extend, sort of exemplify the experience of the moment and expand the prospective psychology, the psychological dimension of the moment. And ambient music in the 70s is operating on a vaguely similar principle of growing new dimensions with which to participate in reality with, if that may be so bold. Because music tends to unlock corridors of potentiality, which is to say, I know it's easy to say that rock and roll is just marketed by businesses and corporations, and the idea that it's rebellious is kind of just a marketing gimmick. But it did make people feel sort of validated to kind of get out there and sort of defy what they saw as contradictions in their world. So it was a contributing. You buy caffeine from a shop, but caffeine's still kind of accelerator.
That's the rule of our
intensifier.
World, it's a natural resource, and all natural resources are exploited.
Point, yeah.
So
that's a great point. Yeah,
the natural resource comes first.
But then, so an album like the music like that is on Phaedra by Tangerine Dream, it's a very new space to occupy ontologically in the 1970s. And so now we're in the 2020s, 2024, June 6th. And now we're in a place where this sort of music's kind of music that's a bit similar to Phaedra, whether it's as effective or not, maybe that's just a matter of opinion, aesthetically, technologically, compositionally. But music downstream of this is everywhere. Ambient new age mixes all over YouTube, and this sort of CDs being just churned out in a cynical corporate manner by artists who are probably sincere, to be fair, some at least. They've been churned out since the 80s and kind of dismissed by critics, consumed by people who purchase crystals and the like, and some people who just like electronic music in general. Stores. That's a good point. That'd probably be good, some good record collections.
Where do you think you bought the Whale Song CD? It was in the Crystal store. Maybe in the other section of the CD store or whatever, but most likely the Crystal store.
Yeah. So does that undignify or reduce the effect of an album like Phaedra by Tangerine Dream? Does it even, or this is an even more dire proposition, does it expose all this ambient music school as a bit of a folly? What I think has happened is we've reached this breaking point with what we were referring to before as that sort of information overload, where we forget the function and purpose of something like Phaedra by Tangerine Dream, because we do live in a world of overstimulation. Now, this not going to apply to everyone. I'm sure there's even people, my age or younger who are like, oh, I think Phaedra's brilliant. I can isolate that from the modern world and the kind of riffraff of information. What are you talking about? That's bless you.
It's probably because they were of the age when they heard it in the 70s, and they probably heard it for the first time at a planetarium. No, that would have been awesome. Going to because I assume they just played music like this in planetariums, and because I think that was a trend in the 70s. Like a post, which is what this album kind of is, right? It's like post moon landing, similar to Zeit. This sort of spacey thing, space existentialism. But then also mixed with that sort of I don't know, existential concept you were talking about earlier, as to where sensory experience, will fit into, music or whatever, or like psychological sort of pretenses,
It's, and even for people like my age or younger, like who could occupy this place, like God bless them, but even someone like myself might have trouble getting into some album like this in the moment. Maybe you could have in any decade, but there is something very.
I'm sure people found it boring in the 70s.
Yeah, potentially. That's a good point. But there's a certain pervasive anxiety about 2020's modernity, wherein the expectation of having to check a certain electronic device at all times, whether it be a smartphone or a computer, or the kind of compulsion to based upon a certain kind of.
Well, it's physiological.
There's sort of it's sort of like how would I describe it? A kind of fevered logic that that you want a rush of the experience of existence, and so to know as much as possible seems like just the obvious thing to do in a moment, and so it's easy to compartmentalize a lot of the truly enriching things of a human existence, and so you kind of potentially reduce those things. And so, which isn't to say that you need to turn off the internet to appreciate something like Phaedra. Indeed, you might need the internet to listen to something like Phaedra. But what's important is to consider the prospect of like why we're so obsessed with nostalgia in the late 20th century now, and it's because the media representation of those years is one of like chill, relax, and kind of it was a good time, because we're being told these events from the people who survived the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah.
And so we have a fairly glossy idea of those times. People say, it was a more dangerous time. It was great. The casualties don't say that because they can't. Now, which isn't to say I'm not trying to shit on the past here.
That's probably why PKD put a list of the dead at the end of Scan of Darkness.
Well, that's a good point, yeah.
I think he was pretty... Because you read stuff like that from the era, say PKD, Hunter S. Thompson, or you listen to albums like Survival by the OJs, or Roots or Understanding, and then you realize it was a very tumultuous time.
Yeah.
Even do basic history,
Yes.
and look at oil crises in the 70s, or plane hijackings, or like numerous things, like militantism on the rise after the counterculture went bad. There's definitely a sort of a false nostalgia, or like a false interpretation of the 70s and say the 80s being like easy going, let's say. It's very generalized.
There may be something to be said for a certain vaguely Zen philosophy that took hold in a certain facet of 1970s English language or Western culture, but that sort of Zen wasn't a necessary. It was sort of necessitated by a sort of chaos that was occurring around them, right? Kind of strolling through a city where there was like kind of crimes and muggings going on, just saying, it's like you're the it is what it is, man. But that's the response, you know what I mean, to something that's quite dire in the first place.
Sure,
but it is an interesting mechanism.
The Zen of that era was television. That's where the mainstream person would have gotten their place of Zen, and that was where the collective consciousness was, back then. In a very similar way to modern forms of it, like a TikTok or YouTube or something like that. Those sort of things,
And we think about the late 20th century in these terms. I think it's easy to glorify pre-internet because it seemed as though everything, I said this before on the channel and this Mandala before, everything seemed like an adventure. It's not like everything's laid out for you on the internet or on a streaming service and you're like, there's so much, I don't know what to watch. It's like in the video shop, it's like it was kind of an adventure. In the library, it's kind of an adventure. Record shop. But I feel like it is fundamentally our choice to slip into this era of anxiety and worry. it is fundamentally a choice, because it seems like the logical thing to do to be anxious in today's day and age. And maybe, just maybe, it requires a leap of existential faith, which is to say, and isn't even involving drugs. It's worth mentioning here. I don't. I seem to have the implication that Edgar Froese was either anti-drugs or didn't use, but I definitely know that he helped David Bowie go sober when he was in Berlin in the mid-70s, which is not an easy place to go sober from what I can understand. Oh no, sorry, or depending on what you did, he went to Germany and Berlin because where he was, there was a lot of cocaine. He was trying to get rid of cocaine, but in Germany it was all about smack, which he fortunately was not really into.
Yeah, and but so he got into smack, didn't he? Yeah.
Oh, he may have, yeah.
Yeah.
But
at least Iggy would have.
I believe that. I think Iggy was into smack before that.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
The point is, he apparently Froese, who's some of his solo albums and as well as the work of Tangerine Dream influenced the direction of Bowie's Berlin trilogy inevitably, and quite, it's quite obvious when you hear them. Which is to say, Froese wasn't really one of these. Maybe he was at one time, but I don't think at this point he was one of these druggy hippies. That's which to say, he took this stuff very, very seriously, as an act of musical experimentation and as an act of internal spiritual exploration. And so that's why I kind of invoked the phrase of the leap of faith, because it did require a certain what we now call, in a sort of derisive manner, but New Age. But let me propose: what if there was something to New Age thinking? What if there was, because we want there to be, like, let's face it, like, unless you're just like a quasi-sadistic sort of scene.
New Age thinking is like derivative of the sort of more, what would you call it? Pacifist and sort of peaceful aspects of world religions, from Christianity to Buddhism to whatever, all world religions, to like traditionalist ones, the Abraham ones, the Eastern ones, and so I think that's like the key aspect of like New Age philosophy is just sort of it's postmodern in the sense that it's not based in a sort of geographical mythology.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, it's a new thought process. It's just, it's like postmodern.
Defined by sort of access to the history, the literature of history,
to pre-internet,
rather than just the moment.
Yeah, because we were quite internationalist even before the internet.
Oh yeah. After World War II.
Yeah, exactly, and so it very naturally led into that. That's what led into the internet. Honestly, it was a very natural progression.
Yes.
It came from militaries, then universities. Well, the universities invented it for the military, and then they used it internally, and then eventually it becomes public. Like, it's definitely a natural progression in that sense, and it's interesting. You evoke the leap of faith, because an album like this, when I was listening to it just recently, I was sort of putting myself in, I guess, the planetarium. I was, because I've heard the album a couple times, but this time it was sort of fresh, because I was sort of imagining what it would have been like to hear these sounds in the 70s for the first time. And just be like even enamored by not even necessarily the construction of, and the sort of overall emotional or like experiential resonance of ambient music. I think some of the people might have just been fascinated by the cool new noises, like that they're able to achieve. Like it's
that was supposed to be something like Dark Side of the Moon, even
ear candy, right? So this album is definitely a lot of ear candy, though it's very well constructed as an ambient piece too. But like this is, especially for this era, they're most like ear candy sort of music. But that was a bit different to say, like, the first time I would have like given Tangerine Dream a proper like full on listen outside of hearing them in movies that they scored and stuff like that. I was just like really sort of bored one afternoon, and like I think Zeit got like recommended as a video, and I'm like, oh, I'll listen to this. And so I'm just like, because there's nothing else to do, I'm just sort of engaging with the music while spacing out sort of thing. And then when it gets into all its like funky, like intricate analog key soloing and stuff, it sort of evokes such a spatial feeling, And I just imagined that, once again back then, like imagined the sort of, existentialism of like post space race like exploration, and sort of like it just naturally went down sort of vaguely philosophical lines out of boredom, and sort of like you were describing before with a leap of faith. Like I would think of an album like Phaedra or Tangerine Dream for someone who's like sort of skeptical of new age sort of music or this sort of experiential, experimental electronic stuff. It'd be interesting to, in this contemporary setting, like you set up there with, overstimulation and stuff like that. The whole philosophy of YouTube and TikTok is to constantly keep people from being bored, right? So like constant engagement, right?
Yeah.
So if not now, more than ever, boredom is a revolutionary act, if you'll permit me to say. So a leap of faith saying, let's say music appreciation here, would be for someone who is like sick of this sort of overstimulation, take a leap of faith, when you're bored or get bored, stop being overstimulated and like just try listen to a Tangerine Dream album and like see how it may engage you, I think it's very valid now for like people to sort of, as a way to like balance yourself. Obviously you don't want to be bored all the time. These things have to sort of oscillate in fluctuation.
Yes,
You want to have a healthy balance of being bored and being stimulated,
captivated,
or captivated,
kind of stimulated.
I think it's like television was like that before, poker machines are like that now. Like it wanted to keep people constantly stimulated, and there's a certain sort of freedom that comes with being able to balance boredom and not having to. You feel more as though you're able to sort of you're leading your own way rather than being led by external forces of entertainment and advertising. And so like this is where music sort of steps outside of say that and into the very legitimate art and philosophical world. That's what Tangerine Dream are great for. And maybe I'm just saying this because I came to Tangerine Dream through boredom, but like because it just reminded me because of all the thing you said. I honestly feel that if people are like feeling sort of anxious because of overstimulation, because of say the internet or entertainment in general, then just like consciously disengage until you become bored and you remember what it's like to be bored, and then you'll find new things to do. Simple as that, really.
Yeah, I also think there is a certain part of the permeating anxiety is just that there's always the idea that no matter what, now you're potentially part of some transparent discourse, and it's always seeming as though you want to be able to do the ideal thing wherein you don't get certain, mockery or criticisms coming away. I'm not even talking about in terms of like, anything to do with cancel culture or UPCs or anything like that. I just mean more in terms of, that's kind of maybe a category of it, to be fair, right? But there's also a genuine idea of what's the right thing to be doing right now? Like, is sitting around listening to albums an okay thing to do? Should I be going out there trying to make money? Should I be going out there doing some cause? Is there a more objective truth that I ought to be pursuing? What's the objectively true thing to do? Because like there's so many perspectives out there. How can my own subjective, would that just be selfish? And look, to be honest, I think my response to that is, I think sometimes, and this is it may be a formula, but I think it is genuinely tried and true. I think if you can find a way to become someone that you yourself are very pleased and proud of and confident in, it's going to, one, it's going to elevate you so you can help other people in a more considerable manner, and two, in terms of being able to quantitatively apply yourself in an ethical manner, let's say, but and two, it's going to elevate and embolden, it's because that sort of anxiety of like how people respond to you. I think people do respond very with enthusiasm and excitement to those who have these kind of, because I believe in people trialing and erroring their own self-doubt on their own terms, you know what I mean? Because I believe in people's capacity to acknowledge their own mistakes on their own terms and sort of grow from them on their own terms. If they're willing to acknowledge that they can make an error, but like it's not a fault of their own. It's them being able to see the error is just as much them, more so them than the error, because they're admitting that they're going forward with a new principle, which is to say it's not necessarily unwise to tune out from the world. That's my long way of saying that. And so therefore, and Phaedra can help you out a lot with that. Do you have anything else to share about Phaedra?
Nah.
Okay, because I will go on a little bit more. Just briefly, it's a world of that zeitgeist was more a mainstream belief, perhaps in an era of the 1970s, and there is a major focus on it now. There's lots of ambient music or ambient-oriented music, noise experiments, soundscapes operating now with self-distribution available on the internet, and they're blending other genres within that paradigm as well. We can talk about Def's Dynamic Shroud. We can talk about the experimental hip-hop acts we were referring earlier when discussing the Little Ugly Mane release. A lot of the beautiful vaporwave from the likes of what's called the Chick Hugh, the Jungle album, anything you see on the Vapor Memory channel, such as Inner Sphere. To me, a lot of that stuff while it does lend itself to people try to categorize them and comment on them and say, whether it alleviates their depression or not in the comments on the internet, I feel like the more appropriate thing to do, or at least the more, for their own sake, this is me attempting, perhaps arrogantly and perhaps effortlessly, as in ineffectually, as I say effortlessly, just to say that it has no effect. It may as well have had no effort taken. There's a world there where you can pull these albums for your own, these music for your own use, and they become essentially documents, and they become like the ideal function of certain philosophic or religious texts would be to be these tomes of wisdom with which you can ground yourself in going forward. And I think that's the potential application with some of the recording sessions, which lead to things like Phaedra and the contemporary equivalents, whether it be Inner Sphere's Voyage Memory, or, as I said, there's a lot of the interesting music here on Vapor Memory of a more ambient leaning. Whilst, as I said, they lend themselves to categorization and sort of scene posturing on the internet, and I can feel that criticism aimed at that world, but I also think that there's a potentiality there to take some of this for one's own usage. Like, there's many works of literature, we were talking about Proust before, which, Proust is easy to, it's easy to critique something like Proust superficially for saying like, oh, it's just something that people can name drop in a university cafe or in an internet forum or a social media post now. But which isn't to say that if someone took Proust out of that context and kind of just read it on their own terms, just someone who was disconnected from everything. But would it be that much of a surprise if someone did get something out of Proust, which is to say this so-called pretentious music, and then and the scene it belongs to, like it's scenes it may accused of being belong to, paragons of. There's no reason they cannot independently in a vacuum
those people
operate.
Are Simple Minds fans. So.
Oh, really? There's no reason they cannot operate within the terms that they are claim to have outside of that world. I recall this one broadcaster I listened to on the internet I just want to share this story briefly. He claimed that when he was in high school, his father wanted him to take this kind of special, kind of exclusive class. He had to kind of ask to be joined in, like, your senior years, about like classic American novels. And so naturally the student was interviewed by the teacher, and the teacher decided, I don't think he's going to get the student in the class. And the student didn't really give a stuff because it was his father's idea, but he told the father, so, oh yeah, I wasn't accepted into the class. And the father was like, what? Let me speak to the teacher. And so the father managed, in a meeting with the teacher, sat down with me, said, why didn't you accept my son in the class? And the teacher said, oh, your son didn't seem that interested. And the father said, as his father told the son this story years later perhaps, yeah, of course he's not interested. He's 17. That's why I want him to do the course, so he understands why these are important. And then the son would say later, like, it was a phenomenal experience. I'd read these novels and I thought, oh, I get it. Like, this 17-year-old in the 1970s was getting, obviously you get things like Catcher in the Rye when you're that age, but even, some of the other great texts by Hemingway or Melville or F. Scott Fitzgerald, you get them. It's not out of the realm for, someone to get them. And that's kind of, I feel similarly about some of these musical examples.
Well, that's the artistry of those books as well. Like, that's why they are. Because, most people try to write something like all the authors you mentioned, and it's just claptrap and hard to understand. Whereas those authors, that's their artistry, is being able to have that universalism, And that's also the role of a lot of music, too. And it is interesting that Tangerine Dream does do that, even though it's not, what most people would think of that sort of music, which is popular music,
Well, it's important to note that Tangerine Dream, we've mentioned this in previous Mandalas, music like Tangerine Dream, especially in a live context, was considered similar to the appeal of ELP at the time, which are a very mainstream act.
Yeah.
The appeal of ELP can be seen now, it's rock music at the end of the day, whereas Tangerine Dream might not fall into that category so much, but...
and also, like, the appeal of Tangerine Dream shows as well, similar to early, like, even, like, Kraftwerk, when they completely embrace, even in, like, there's that infamous, like, Kraftwerk inventing EDM or whatever in 1968.
Yeah.
Like, the appeal of shows like that back then, or even, Tangerine Dream at a cathedral. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's like a sort of mixture of art installation and, like, opera or whatever.
Precisely, yeah.
And it's...
Tech demo.
And tech demo, exactly. It's meant to be, like, the people at the time being like, this is the new technology,
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of intrinsically tied to how fascinating the new tech is and the new sounds and stuff, It was like, maybe even more so than the music itself,
And I'm gonna I'm just gonna throw out here now. Someone might cynically propose, and it is worth snarkily remarking, frankly. What's the appeal of Phaedra to the common working person? What use could they have for something sort of that? Well, ask a lot of these people, do they like to go fishing? If the answer to, like, potentially up to, like, 60 or 70% of them is sometimes or definitely yes, can't you, like sitting on a boat in a river with a fishing rod out there, what's to say that, and there's plenty of people who would find that fucking boring too, but what's to say that those people couldn't get the appeal of something like Phaedra? Like, it's quite obvious to me, I think.
That's an apt analogy, because it is very similar. Yeah. Definitely.
Anyway, that's essentially all I want to say about Phaedra. I'm actually finally finished here, and now I think it's time to go.
Tangerine Dream throughout this whole time is just, like, next level.
Oh, and we could also go on a spiel on about why Tangerine Dream become less interesting.
Rubicon as well. That's over there.
Hey,
Rubicon's a great album.
Hi, Rubicon.
They're all good.
And we could go on a spiel potentially about where Tangerine Dream kind of go wrong with the discography, and how which diagnoses a sort of something which occurs in the wider world of technology / recorded music in general. But I think I feel like that's too big a topic for just Phaedra. So rather, let's move on to the recordings, all of them on one disc with Grauzone, right?
Well, we're going to move from the Berlin school to whatever other German city school this one's
No, this is from Switzerland.
Oh, they're Swiss.
Grauzone is Swiss, like Crocodile and Toad.
Okay, I thought they were German, but that's because the title of this album's in German.
It's from Bern.
Die, Nice, this group's awesome, honestly. This is, it's more in the minimal synth school, I guess you'd call it, or like the the reason I guess why I also thought it was German is they're categorized as, what is that, the New Deutsch, whatever, New German.
New Deutsch Well.
Yeah, the German New Wave movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so this album's like from that sort of school of Teutonic, let's say, European music, Teutonic music, the Germanic sort of thing. And this album's, I don't know, man, it's like all their, because they only ever had the one album and a few singles, and so I think this is like a compilation from the 90s of most of their recordings.
Oh, I just want to mention, I think there was a comment on here which stated that, like, it's everything except one of the B-sides from Moscow single.
Oh, okay.
I think Ein Tanz mit dem Tod, I believe this commenter claims is the one track not on there.
No, I think that's on there. I can't speak German, but I know the melody. I think it's that song.
I don't see it on the track list.
Okay, maybe I'm confusing it with another song.
Like, it's very possible, like, you've heard the song, but maybe it's just not on this release.
Yeah, I guess not. Oh, I was just confusing it, because I don't speak German. The title sounded like a melody off one of the later tracks.
Right,
I think the
right,
last
right.
track of the Sunrise tapes.
Realm.
No, the one before that. I think. I can't quite recall.
Schlachtet.
Yeah, and then they've all got funky titles. There's just something about, like, the reason I picked this album is because it was the first bit of, like, album of theirs I ever heard. Probably around the same time I first heard, like, Secession. And, there's just something so addictive about a few of their songs that, like, I just kept coming back to listen to them. Like, they've just sort of got, like, they're right on the cusp of that same scene you were talking about before with all the English post-punk bands. That was sort of the German scene, and they're from more the Simple Mind school, let's say, of trying to make, like, new wave music, rather than, what's the more industrial one again? DAF, and also the other one,
Einstein to New Barton.
Yeah, Einstein to New Barton. Yeah, it's the DAF, I guess, they're that, and then they go into the more, like, dancey stuff.
Yeah.
But, New Barton, they're, like, full-on experimental, like, Throbbing Gristle-esque, like, noise. Whereas these guys are all doing, like this album's just, like, you just call it pop songs, I guess, because it goes through, like, there's like a doo-wop song on here, there's, like, synth ballads, there's, like, post-punky songs, there's the sort of, like, disco beat, minimal synth electro sort of dance songs. And it's just all, like, it's all fairly lo-fi in the sort of, minimal synth vein. It was a sort of DIY movement for the most part. And yeah, this album just sort of, it occupies that space in my mind as being like a great collection of sort of pop songs that would work in many other contexts. Even though, once again, I don't understand German, they still have, like, very beautiful melodies. Even though German, to me, always seems like it doesn't work in pop songs. It's a bit too, like, there are too many, it's too much, like, phonetics, too many syllables in the words. But this album seems to make it work in such a natural way. Like, I don't feel like it's goofy that I'm listening to, like, German lyrics in pop music. They're just, like, very natural pop songs laid on top of that very, like, experimental, minimal synth, like, electronic sort of stuff. Very, like, natural to that movement. So yeah, I find this group as like and this album is a fascinating sort of DIY pop sort of thing, artifact within that scene. A very cool scene, full of great bands like the ones we mentioned. Like, and there's one called Malaria. There's thousands of them, honestly. It was a very, like, vibrant scene, and obviously Eisbar is a classic. There's another song in here called, like, Du Zeigst und Weit or something, and it's got, like, the greatest, like, electric guitar rhythm I've ever heard. Similar to, you mentioned earlier, actually, I never thought of this, the Kinks song, Picture Book, where it's like, and it lays all these guitars over it in such a, for a DIY recording, such a vibrant way. And so, yeah, this album's just full of those, like, vibrant, like, production moments, and then just, like, kind of fun songwriting. And I'm a sucker for that whole scene. So this album is just in my mind, a sort of classic of that scene.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. This album you're seeing here, it's a compilation from 1998, which included most or 98% of the discography and of everything they recorded. Although it has the same cover as their 1981 self-titled LP, which is the only actual studio album they ever released. Although most people, it's interesting. That's how you first heard of the band via this compilation being uploaded to YouTube, because most people will also find out about this act, Growlzone, via YouTube, but it's because they see this blue cover with a little polar bear in the corner there, and it's of course the single cover for the Ice Bar / Ich lieb sie, which is how I would have heard of the group first. It's a lovely single. Check it out. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
that'll motivate you to check out the rest of the music anyway.
Yeah.
Which is a quick little, very immediate release actually. I'd never listened to this. I'd heard the self-titled Growlzone at one point. It's a fucking great album actually.
Yeah.
But no, this is awesome too. Like this is just everything they ever did, and you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
You know what's great about their sound is, although this is not indicative of all of the songs, because it's almost like Ice Bar, similar to like European post-punk like Red Zebra or the Bosnian group Pauk. Who have a, you can. I can't remember what that song's called. You know, or maybe even that German group, They Fade in Silence. Don't go, it's much too late to say goodnight. But a lot of the songs on here they're not. It's difficult. It's kind of annoying to want to say industrial here, because I don't mean it sounds like Severed Head / Throbbing Gristle / the groups that came from Throbbing Gristle and the German acts like Halbermensch, DAF. It's industrial. Well, it's part of the scene partly of DAF and Halbermensch, as you said.
Yeah.
But, like there's a certain.
That's the minimal scene. Yeah.
I guess that's the minimal sim sound is it's kind of adjacent to the industrial sound. Like the sounds are very. They're not large in the sense of say big music, but they're large in the sense that they're very direct, and these noises are they're all very pronounced.
Yeah.
And they have they stick to you, and it's not like the sort of coming and going of like kind of sleek punk or kind of like shiny cold wave records, for example.
And analog synthesizer melodies are so good as well.
Yeah, it's just such they have one of the more kind of captivating collections of records, recordings of the groups of Europe and the UK in this period. It's an awesome moment. They only existed from 80 to 82, which is nice because they were clearly, I guess this in our mind, was them as geniuses who then dissolved rather than went on to do some sellout bullshit like after the first album or whatever. So it's cool like that.
Like Simple Minds.
Like Simple Minds, even like Gang of Four. Well, Gang of Four,
sure,
like that's a different sort of group. Gang of Four, like those the album 3 and 4 in the 80s, they're not so bad. They're more commercial 80s, but at least it's like, you know, it's like commercial, like early 80s music. It's like kind of harmless and fun, and it's in a vacuum.
A band like Growlzone
in the 90s and 2000s.
They couldn't do that because they wouldn't sell out in like they'd never potentially break America.
Yeah.
Very few European bands could do that. Only like Aha, right? And maybe like is it Nina? 99 Luftballons?
Sure, yeah.
A band like Growlzone would have like never been able to break out in like they were probably only heard
they're kind of
in
ruthlessly European.
If they were even heard in England, it would have been on like late night radio shows, the sort of stuff that the synth people were listening to in the late 70s and 80s. You know? Yeah,
it's they could maybe manage an English tour, but I didn't even think they were ever that popular.
That's probably the key to why that scene is so sort of unique and interesting. It might be sort of similar to say people always attribute that the Dunedin sound, that New Zealand indie rock thing, as being like unique due to the isolation, and they're all bands that know they're never gonna make it outside of their direct like geographical culture. They're making it for the locals essentially.
Yeah.
And that's sort of this music, and that's probably why this compilation is more reviewed or like sort of exposed to the general music fans than their actual album.
Is that the case?
Oh, isn't that what you were saying before?
Not necessarily. I don't think I wasn't trying to infer that because I'm not aware if that's the case. I'm not sure. They both have the same amount of reviews.
The same amount.
4 and 4.
Oh wow,
and,
that's not many.
Rating. The compilation has much less ratings, but I guess it's a compilation that goes without saying.
Yeah.
But there's probably more of the. I mean, the comp has released on CD in the '90s, late '90s. It probably had a bigger pressing release than the album in '81, I would imagine, which is probably more of an underground thing. So potentially more people know it from the comp, but I was going to suggest most people know it from the internet and iSpar being a thumbnail.
Yeah.
But you said you saw this on the internet, so you're probably not. I'm assuming you're not the only one.
And I think iSpar was like
iSpar's on here, obviously.
I think
both songs are on here.
Quite a big hit in Germany at
true,
the time.
yeah.
Well, like fairly big hit, yeah. So that's sort of their most well-known song as well.
Okay.
But yeah, cool group. It's a unique scene that eventually, I guess, got its sun at some point in the 2010s. That's how I got onto it, I guess. Like, I don't know if it's covered that much, but obviously things like,
Who knows?
They started a minimal synth, like record label to do all this repressing, minimal wave records.
Yeah. Well,
so that did become a sort of niche around then.
I do notice here there's a couple of, they have a well, firstly there's in 2010 we have, I just want to briefly show you this. I believe this would be the complete discography this was released in 2010.
Oh, no way. That's cool. It's got an iSpar. Which I assume it can, if there's a German person out there, is iSpar ice bear, like polar bear?
I'm just going to assume that that's the case. It must be.
Because I think it must be
he loves the beers and the beers love him.
I want to see, the beers. Good old Werner.
The beers.
But can we start a petition to make the English word for polar bear ice bear? Because people would start protecting the North Pole if they were called ice bears.
That's probably true.
It's something out of like.
That is what it would take. Yeah, there's also a couple comps released in 2021, but a reason I wanted to bring, there's a re-release of the Realm as a single in the 6th of December 2019 with 3 other versions of it on the other on ASA2 and B1 and B2, and I'm just gonna assume was this who issued this? Was this Minimal Wave who issued this? Oh no, sorry, it's WRWTFWW Records, and I think that's the Swiss thing. We release whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah,
records.
we release. Yeah, no, they do all these as well. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
They're the other big one.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, no, I was like, what is the name of that? It's that. Yeah.
Beautiful. We got the name. Yeah.
Because I think they even had a YouTube channel.
And maybe I'm gonna try and make a transition to the next record.
Yeah, jump on what's the next one?
Another record, a group which from North America, which had trouble breaking out outside of North America. Now, they were never as big in their native Canada, but they did have a lot of airplay and presence in the United States itself. But outside of North America, most certainly in this country, Australia, hey, Rush? Never heard of them.
Yeah, no, I don't think they were ever here.
They never toured here. Their records never made an impact here. They had some presence in the UK in the 70s, or at least the protagonist of Gregory's Girl is a big fan. Speaking of Scotland. But which to say, but I think the reason is because the star of that film, the actor, I can't remember his name, which is unfortunate. He's fantastic. He was a big fan of the band, and so they decided to incorporate posters in the bedroom. It was very, very cool. That's from 1980. But anyway, we discussed Rush and went over their discography in a couple of shows ago, Grace Under Pressure in particular.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so we know the general thoughts we have on this group, and myself in particular at least, and I inferred that Presto by Rush, whether it was in that context or in another context, I wanted to discuss potentially Presto in future, and so here we are. With Presto by Rush, this is one of the most interesting of their albums, and I don't say it's one of the best of their albums, although it has the potential to be. But is that me saying that if I listen to it enough times, maybe it'll get there? I've probably listened to this 40 plus times, and I still don't know if it quite gets there, because there is a lot of there's a lot of energy and as I said, potency here. I really want to believe in this album because I love the concept of this lyrically. Because as I read in the previous Mandala about Presto, this is the guys approaching. They're in their 30s at this point. They're going to be 40 in the not too distant future by 1989, and they're thinking like, where do we go from here? They're dealing with love's come and gone, and maybe having kids, getting older, getting fatter, losing. I mean, Neil Peart was writing about losing his hair back in '75, but they're in this very weird situation of approaching middle-aged existentialism.
What was the thing that he always wore again? Oh, a do-rag.
Yeah.
Nah, he just embraced the do-rag.
Good point. He wore it well.
Sorry, yeah, please go.
Oh, and at one point it was compared, I don't think this was on Mandala, but to releases like The Who's the Who by Numbers or Genesis's Duke. And I don't think it's as effective as either of those records, although it really had the potential. What goes wrong? Because it's not necessarily the ambitions of the lyrics, although maybe sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, the rhyming couplets seem a bit sloppy or awkward. But I think what goes wrong here, unfortunately, because Rush are not usually that, they're not usually prone to these mistakes, but it feels like there's something of a banality for the songwriting going on here where the vocals are concerned. It's worth mentioning, I have heard before that this was meant to be like the vocal album of the bunch, and people have some said, oh, this is Geddy's best vocal performance. Now I'm going to drop whether it is or not for now and just say that I love when it's just the instruments. I think it's glorious. Some of them it's like prog sophisti prog when we're in the instrumental mode, and it's fucking interesting because it's the only
because they sort of delved in that a little bit on the previous album.
Hold Your Fire, it's an organic evolution, as I mentioned in another probably the Grace and Depression segment from Hold Your Fire. But the thing with Presto is I feel like the vocal segments and the kind of choruses, the kind of what are meant to be the hooks, I feel like they let this album down, and I really wanted like the songs to grow on me, but only some of them. I've been listening to this for like most of this decade now, and it's the shortest decade so far. And the world might end this year or the next, so it'll be, it will be the whole of the decade potentially. But I've been listening to Presto.
I don't think the situation is that dire.
I said might, not definitely.
Yeah.
But anyway, if just for sake of argument, then I would have listened to Presto a whole decade, and nothing, but it's still really captivating as a album to think about. But as an album to listen to, I always find myself let down by the actual run time, like that. The enjoyability of the album starting to album finishing is never quite what I want it to be. And I'm going to go for the track list right now because I feel like Show Don't Tell is a disappointing opener, like especially when it's chorus, show me, don't tell.
It's the sort of song that they should have either shoved it at the end of the album or put it on a B-side.
That's a great point.
It's like, it's unfortunate that they put it at the start of the album. Because there are definitely better songs to come.
Chain Lightning would be great if it was all verses, but this is a really kind of bland, kind of emotional chorus. The pre-chorus is Response, Vibrate, and that part's nice, but then Some Dark Fire Upon the Horizon, it gets annoying when you hear it more than once, especially.
Yeah.
And then The Past, which is a kind of audacious song about suicide, and I did like how on one of these Rush fans or Contrarians channels, they pointed out that the lyric Christ, what have you done is not just necessarily sort of like an exclamation of shock, oh Jesus Christ, what have you done? It's in response to someone contemplating or having attempted or having committed suicide. It's potentially, maybe Neil Peart's doing this would be interesting, invoking the ubiquity of Christ as a martyr in the culture. Has this enabled this idea that removing oneself from sort of that romantic ideal of sacrifice has, as some people in that state might see it, has that had a wider effect on the culture. And that's, I don't know if the lyrics are truly going for that, but that's a really interesting take.
I remember that was one of the more interesting songs on the album. There was one lyric on there, the only lyric that probably caught me on the album. And it was like, it's funny you mentioned it was about suicide, because it was something about like when you're about to explode, and I was like, holy shit, that's pretty somber.
Yeah, The Past is like After Image, a very, I guess, depressing song of Pitt's works in the 80s for Rush. And then War Paint, you know, I like the idea of the song, but like just it gets repetitive, you know, the mirror always lies, paint the mirror black, boys and girls, it's corny. Scars, this is one of the ones I do get excited for when it comes on. I guess this feeling, stop the atmospheric changes make me sensitive. Okay, nice bass line leads the song, do 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 do, and then some of Neil Peart's best drumming on the album is here, and then they named the song they named the album after is probably the one I get least excited for. If I could wave my magic wand, I'd make everything alright. Too sentimental. Nothing happens in this song. And but then Superconductor, the next track, which was the B1, the first track on the second side. If you listen to this on an LP, Superconductor's a lot of fun. I think it's tremendous, and I think it's Rush doing this kind of power pop thing, and it's I get a kick out of it. That's entertainment. Anagram for Mongo is the one I have the least time remembering how it goes, but I do know how it goes. At least the ending for the piano. There is no sense of dear, na, na, na. I like the name of the song, but the song itself doesn't, like, I don't know. There are Smith songs with great titles, and I sometimes don't remember how the song goes. But they're good songs when you listen to them. Oh, the Anagram from Mongo is okay. Red Tide's great. Red Tide's one of the best things on here. It's like a sequel to Red Lenses, I imagine.
Yeah.
Do 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 do. Red Tide washes. Do do do. Good incorporation of piano, acoustic piano one, or maybe it's done for Casio.
And synths as well.
Yeah.
That's one of the songs they're not afraid to put some synths on in this album.
Yeah, the producer Rupert Hines said, guys, you're meant to be a guitar power trio, no more synths anymore.
Yeah.
Although it still sounds like a very 80s album in that sophisti / well, I'll get to it in a moment. Because Hand Over Fist is the other really boring song on here. It's a bit cringe, I'm not going to lie. I don't like using that word because it seems a bit lazy application of as far as adjectives go.
Sure.
Well, I guess it's a verb, right? Cringe. But I guess it's both. It's a verb.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Hand Over Fist. Available Light is
Rush do
great.
have their cringe moments, like
No doubt.
What's this? You know, the lead single on Hold Your Fire.
Oh, Time Stands Still.
Yeah, with the girl from the This Is Carrie song.
This Is Carrie. Yeah, it sounds like that. Voices Carrie. Till Tuesday.
Yeah.
Really great song actually, but I think the rest of the group plus Time Stands Still is one of the weaker Rush songs in my opinion. I really like Hold Your Fire, but that lets it down.
Yeah.
Especially at the start there, you're like, why the fuck am I listening to this shit?
Yeah.
Beside B of Hold Your Fire is really good. Like Turn the Page is one of the best Rush songs of the 80s, I think, actually. But kind of a prototype for Superconductor even. But and then as I was saying, Available Light is actually like Between the Wheels. It's one of the best Rush songs, and I like, someone pointed this out, Available Light, it's when in the era of, film, photography with, pre-digital photography, Available Light was, literally, the photographs, if you didn't have much light, the photograph might not have looked good, and sometimes you were able to do impressive things, and you said, then someone might have asked, oh, what would you do that with? And you just said, oh, that's just with Available Light.
Okay.
And so Available Light as a metaphor for I guess I don't know, hope, or just the potential belief in the future. I quite like that, and I like the idea of the
that's a very
song
Neil
in general.
Peartism as well.
Yeah. I appreciate that, but God, you've heard me there, like having a pretty difficult time trying to name things I really appreciate as we go through the tracks. But I do love what they're going for in this album. But you know what it is? The audience they're going for, because I think they think Rush fans at this point in time, or maybe the audience they're trying to appeal for, they're people who recently got CDs and the CD players almost in a Patrick Bateman way, but like to sit back with their like kind of expensive spirit and just kind of listen to it in their sound system and think, yeah, it's emotional, it's about feelings, it's about me in middle age and what I'm going through. And you think about it and you listen to it like that sophisticated pop music, like it's Frasier Chorus except it's not catchy.
Yeah.
We've had a genius songwriter, Tim whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just, oh man, like
Yeah,
I want this album
song's
to be.
definitely
I want
uncatchy.
this to be a masterpiece, like so badly in the way of Grace Under Pressure, or even like how I love Power Windows a lot, and like. But I don't even think it's as good as Hold Your Fire. Which Hold Your Fire is not perfect. That's a bit too. How does it make you feel? Oh well, it makes you feel. But how does it make you feel? I just like it's just a bit. That's new agey in the kind of derisive sense, I suppose. But it's a fun album. Production's great. It's a little very, especially on headphones, good stuff.
Sure.
But Presto. I do really like the production actually. Like I mean, even though Rupert Hine moved them away from a direction I would have found interesting. This is where the times are moving forward toward, and it's interesting them doing their take on this sort of supposedly classier guitar like songs as not as catchy sort of rhythmic pop items, but as like things you listen to and they tell a story and you're like, oh yes, that's a good song, which really means it's a good story that was just sung by someone, and it's just like, oh man. I'm going to pause for now. I'll finish what I have to say after I hand it over to the guest, Mr. Sir Custard here.
Well, as the world's only moderate Rush fan, like, the common mythology of, like, people either love or hate Rush. Like, I'm the world's only moderate Rush fan. Like, I'll like Rush kind of particularly. Because they go for really interesting... Like, honestly, their early era, like, of the progressive rock / like, proto-progressive metal or something, they have interesting ideas. But then when they evolve into, like, the synth thing, they sort of become more mature songwriters and have even better albums. But, like, the overall sort of... Like, I suppose this album is sort of like a... It's a deep cut in the Rush fandom, like a pretty far deep cutter, I think. Like if someone didn't know Rush, you wouldn't obviously recommend this album first. And like I think that's clear why. It's something that's like only like a really deep into it Rush fan. Like I'm talking about now. What you definitely said in the contemporaneous sense of the sort of like CD era sort of entertainment system listening Patrick Bateman thing that would have been contemporaneous to when this album was released.
Yeah.
But like as like
I don't know how many of these songs were hits. Maybe we wouldn't know in Australia. But maybe in Canada some song was hits. I don't know if in America because you never hear about any of these songs. You even hear about Timestamp still had the video.
They were big in America in like what 1980 or whatever. Tom Sawyer, right?
Yeah, I think Subdivisions and like Big Money had the video.
Yeah.
Timestamp still had the video, but I don't think any of the songs on Presto, even though if they were released as singles, were big songs. And like I'm just checking now, Show Don't Tell in the past were singles, and like I'm just gonna.
Yeah, so
continue, sorry.
at least you wouldn't send like someone who's never listened to Rush and may be interested here first. This is more an album that someone like yourself, like you just did, who's listened to a lot of other Rush, would listen to this and. Like you said, there's a weird sort of like... There's an overall thing they're going for there, but like you just dissected what's going wrong. Like that's sort of what I was feeling as well as a moderate Rush fan, who's like familiar with their albums and the sort of evolution of their sound and stuff. And obviously this is, like you said, they move away from the synths to like the guitar or whatever. And like the first few times I heard this album, like say you were playing it, I would have... it felt to me very, like you said, for Superconductor, it's sort of power poppy, and it feels almost like they're going for, like they're sort of trying to incorporate elements of like 80s alternative rock, Like maybe they heard a bit of R.E.M. on the college radio or something, or heard that these bands were sort of starting to come in, and like R.E.M. are very power pop, for example. Like this album sort of reminds me of something like Life's a Rich Pageant or something. Or at least when it doesn't, because Rush always lean into the prog elements as well.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, when this album's trying to sort of just do because like you said, it's like a singing album. It's sort of trying to be led by like a, like they're trying to be like melodic, and it just, Geddy Lee's voice is like, it works really well in the early era when they're doing the fantasy stuff and he's like a yelling imp or whatever. And then he blends it in like a kind of natural way in the synth era, where it's sometimes like robotic, sometimes like ethereal, you know.
Yes.
And so it works really well then. But like in this case, like as I'm listening to it, I'm trying to think of what I would do to like get the best out of these songs, trying to be like a more melodic Rush, because some of the guitar stuff is great.
Yeah.
But they should have gotten either a different singer and have Geddy do like harmonies or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe that would be
stay on bass and keys.
maybe that would be a bit much for like fans or whatever. Maybe a bit too experimental to their formula. But they're trying to do something new. So, but it gets caught up in being like traditionalist as well.
Yeah.
Whereas if say like even Alex Lifeson doing the vocoder superconductor thing, if the songs had that more even muted like cold wave like aspect to their delivery, that would be cool as well.
Yeah.
With the sort of sound and tone of the album.
Yes. Yeah.
Like it's a shame they stuck too hard to the tradition of like having Geddy Lee do the vocals and things like that. Like potentially they could, maybe that's too out there for the Rush fan base at the time. But like they could have done some more interesting things with the vocals. Definitely, it does let down the album a bit. Because other than that, the sound is fairly good. Yeah, the only way I would criticize the sound of the album is maybe they do fall into like Rush-isms a few times, like the guitar solos and stuff, or it feels like they're just placed in songs where it's like, oh, we got to have this part here.
That's a good point.
You know.
Yeah.
Whereas, say, when they evolved their songwriting style in the 80s, they're just doing all these new things. Like a good example is like Rush in the early 80s with the synths. They would do like, sometimes rather than having like, similar to like OMD, you'll have a hook for a chorus that's like an instrumental part. But this album sort of eschews that and doesn't have those little like instrumental hooks. Like, you know, there's a Rush song where, I can't remember which one it is, but some synths just start going for a few bars. It's, oh man, I think it's on Grace Under Pressure. But yeah, there's all these just
Red
like...
Lenses?
It might be Red Lenses. I think it is, yeah. There's just that one chorus break there. Like, there's none of that sort of stuff on this album, or at least, like, not enough. They fall back into, like, just their tropes, you know? They're not doing, like, new, strange things.
Yeah.
Which they definitely were doing a few years prior to this. Like, yeah, there's potential in these songs. If maybe they let them cook for a little longer as well, could have been a bit better, you know? It kind of feels like they're just sort of going through the motions, you know? So it is understandable that this album's a deep cut. But there are things to enjoy, but yeah, it's definitely not their best album.
I wanted to mention here...
and like you said, pretty much all the songs you pointed out as being the best songs are pretty much the best songs in the album. Like I said, that third song, and then the last song. And what was the one...
Superconductor and
The
Scars.
The red one.
Red Tide. Oh,
Red Tide. That's one of the better songs as well.
At least 5 really good tracks there, but it's one of these 50-minute, like 11-song albums from the late 80s. And it was an LP. Like, it's not like CD or anything. I mean, it's adjacent to it, but like, it all fit on an LP.
Yeah, a few of the songs just, they feel a bit filler, you know.
Yeah, namely Hand Over Fist, and strangely enough, the title track.
Yeah.
And the inspiration for the album art, you know, Presto, like Abracadabra, and there's the rabbits out of the hat there. I mean, so I wanted to mention Show Don't Tell, and this is what they looked like. This is the sound. This is Fisty Rush.
Yeah. They start wearing those
Peaked
suits.
at number 1 on US Hot Mainstream Rock Tracks chart.
Yeah, wow.
The second of 5 songs by Rush to top the chart.
Jeez.
And the other single released was The Past, that third track, the Suicide song.
Oh, wow.
Christ, What Have You Done? Peaked at number 15. And a music video was made for the song, never seen it.
I wonder if the PMRC cared about that.
And apparently, this is kind of interesting. All of us get lost in the darkness. Dreamers learn to steer by the stars. All of us do time in the gutter. Dreamers tend to look at the cars. Alludes to Oscar Wilde's We Are All in the Gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. From his play, Lady Windermere's Fan. That's a really great play. They are, and most of them are, of course. But no, Presto by Rush, like... I'll listen to it just for the sound and like because they're... like if this was just a random album by a band, I would say it's this. Well, you can't imagine that because it's right. It's Geddy singing. And it's like it's the drumming and the bass and the guitar. Like it's so distinctly them. And I guess what's the appeal of them is that they're always doing some alien project, but you know what? Like it's fucking fascinating. And I've said this about other albums which actually are that successful. Remember I said about in the first Mandala, I said whether the Garden is better than Mathematic or not, I prefer what the Garden was going for. Like that sort of regal, sort of timeless, precise, like in between dimensions, like that sort of like bridging of the centuries. Wow, you know. And Presto, what Presto's going for. But look, fuck me, I love what Invisible Touch is going for in a respect, in a sort of like pseudo-spiritual sense. But like,
yeah, it's a bit
and it's
more...
totally misguided and fucking rich people going to fucking retreats and stuff, you know, Buddhist retreats. But Patrick Bateman, as we referred earlier, I mean, there's the Patrick Bateman record, obviously.
Yeah.
Literally, you know, but Presto, like God, and so far as what it's going for, it's one of the 5 most interesting Rush, maybe not 5, but like one of the most interesting Rush albums in terms of what I want it to be. But as for what it is, I was probably still in the top 10
Yeah,
for what it
I
is.
suppose its thematics are a bit more abstract than what Rush tend to be, because, like, you know, Rush are like...
They never had a really thematically interesting album afterwards. It was just kind of like a sort of genre fiction, like old space.
Correct me if
rock
I'm wrong, but an ongoing trope in Rush's like artistic vision is these sort of like visual puns. Like the Grace Under Pressure inside sleeve has like the egg being crushed.
Yes.
Hemispheres is obviously...
Hugh Syme was a regular artist. He designed a lot of that stuff.
Counterparts as a concept is like very on the nose like that as well. Like they're a bit like that, you know.
Test for Echo of the Free Guys on the Rock.
Sure, yeah, like
Snakes and Arrows, of course.
Yeah, like they're sort of, they very rarely get like sort of abstract in with their ideas, you know, in that sort of sense. They're very literal. Like they're so literal that like maybe that's why their fans are considered nerds, because like they've got a song where a chorus is binary.
1-0. I
which
that song.
Is like
I like it a lot. It's very fun.
No, it's very creative in taking that angle, you know. Whereas this is the album that they're trying to be abstract and a bit more like, for lack of a better word, beatnik. You know, they're never like that. Whereas like that was the sort of thing, like the sophisticated beatniks, you know.
Drinking coffee,
Yeah, because and that was the time of the beatnik revival.
Yeah.
And so...
Barfly, yeah. Oh, no, Bukowski, but, you know.
Similar, in that vein, definitely, yeah. And so this album is sort of their take on that, I suppose. Whereas, generally they're very literal with their thematics, right? They very rarely get abstract.
Like there's well, even just the idea of like, you know, this album's called Presto, you got the mad invocation of magic and sort of changing reality on the cover. Like that's such a beautiful juxtaposition with the album being about, you know, approaching your middle age and realizing how insignificant you are as like a mortal human. And so like that's such a cool idea, but I think it's the last time there's a really interesting, I think all the like moving pictures through to this have such interesting concepts. Like moving pictures, I mean, I don't know if you could call that a consistent concept so much as it's just an amalgamation of the concerns Rush had up to that point in time, you know, whimsical environment, modernity, and Signals, you know, was a through and through concept album. Grace Under Pressure, we went through that. Power Windows is much like Signals, and then Hold Your Fire was very much like, you know, spiritual and a certain creeping existentialism. But then it's like Presto is like the existentialism, but like a bit more unimpressed with the results of the retreat that they went on from Hold Your Fire, and now they're kind of like going back. It's like I don't know, it's almost like White Album after the sort of Peppers and Mystery tour in a way. That's probably pushing it a bit. And look, Presto is an immensely interesting effort. And as for the actual results, well, I mean, I went through them. I mean, there's at least 5 really efficient and memorable songs that came out of it, and admirable works. But I think the rest of it. Well, you know what? Like when I say like the I once said this about, and it does exist. Genesis 1983 self-titled. The instrumental album of that without the vocals would be great, and it is. I've heard a bit of it. Someone's put it on YouTube. Presto is just the instrumentals would be killer, and like I can say that about certain later Dream Theater albums as well. Which Hussein obviously did artwork for, and like was the genesis of the whole Dream Theater sound was clearly Rush, and
it wasn't Genesis?
I guess it's a bit of both. But no, in future, I might, as a bit of karma, I might have to make you listen to a bit of Marillion or Dream Theater or God forbid Jethro Tull in future. Just to get back as you for the album we need to transition to.
Oh yeah, no, of course. The next one is Built to Spill, perfect from now on. Hell yeah. No, well that's the correct reaction to the album. That's the whole idea. There's a funny anecdote a friend of mine had where he said he listened to this album on LSD, and I'm gonna paraphrase, but it was something along the lines of like extreme elongated like psychological or mental torture, and I was like, that's amazing, holy shit, because that
well yeah
yeah that's what it's going for. It's amazing. It's man, this is one of those albums when
that drum sound is meant to like drive you up the fucking wall.
Oh well, it's like you mentioned, Joe.
That's the first two tracks. I was like, nah. Keep going, please.
Yeah, well, that's like Dream Theater, right? Or like
Mike Portnoy.
prog metal, yeah, just drums that sound like Bill Bruford.
But they're all over the place. It's like, is it the one sound?
Oh, snare, yeah.
But it's so repetitive on the first, at least on the first two tracks. I found it really distracting. Yeah, keep going.
Oh, fair enough. You got that caught up on the sound of the drum?
Momentarily, like for a few minutes early on, like I was able to kind of tune it out. But yeah, I just pointed that out.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, no, I was gonna say this is one of those albums. When I first heard it, I was like, man, when I first the first song started, I was like, this is like something else. It's like a strange like post rock like raga song or something about the strange like cosmic existentialism sort of thing, and that's the sort of the prevailing like idea of this album. Is it's this weird like sort of like dream state, almost like paranoia or like melancholy of like the moments you were describing earlier of like this sort of coming of age, where will life lead, like do you remember Walter type sort of thing. That's sort of like the prevailing sort of ghost that looms over this album, and it's sort of like done in these like almost torturous like elongated like intricately jammed out like almost like it's weird actually. I remember reading once that apparently the reason why this album has like songs that go for so long, like over like they go for like 8 minutes.
The shortest track is 4.5 minutes.
Yeah, is because the guy who's behind it, his name's like Doug Marsh or something. He like hated how like Nirvana and grunge was so popular and took over like the indie and then mainstream like rock music scene, and so in a weird way like punk did like a Ouroboros on itself and like went progressive rock by accident, and so you get like I've never really liked bands like Tool or like you mentioned before, Dream Theater or something like that. Like I know where I can find them intriguing, but like they just never appealed to me in a way where like something like this album will combine that sort of like I mentioned with someone like Dog Bowl from the Dog Bowl Kramer thing.
Yeah.
That sort of school of like slacker rock, hard on your sleeve, like earnest, like sort of tortured, dream-like sort of neo psychedelic space, and it incorporates that with these sort of raga-esque and like long extended, jammy like progressive songs, and it just creates such a weird atmosphere that very few albums can. It's like you want to talk about like death metal being extreme or something like that. Nah, it's like stuff like this. It's like. And within those moments, you get like these very short snippets of like melodic, sort of like interesting work. It reminded me of like when I was listening to Relayer recently. You'll get those combinations of these like really bombastic jazz fusiony things, and then just John Anderson creates some like beautiful melody that then leads into the next one. It's sort of by accident in that sort of vein of like the Tales of a Topographic Ocean sort of songwriting. So it's weird to me that this album is like really beloved, but I think that's because there must be some sort of like it speaks to some sort of weird end of the 90s like equivalent of that Do You Remember Walter like melancholy coming of age thing, and I think it reflects that in a way more real way than like I always deride say OK Computer of doing, where that sort of extended torture of like this getting intimate with like this very peculiar sort of like piece of music is more like relieving than say something like OK Computer, at least to me. Like when I listen to that I just feel more hollow. Whereas like this is an actual exercise, and like it has little like very peculiar little like breakthrough moments that only interesting extended pieces of music like this can, I feel. But obviously like Radiohead or Geddy Lee, the main thing that's conducive of like people like the vocalist is very particular. It's like I was saying with like Robert Plant, like these things they vary from people to people, you know what I mean? It's always very particular, and that's the main thing that why like most people probably wouldn't want to listen to like this guy's music is because his voice.
Yeah, I want to briefly mention on OK Computer, it's like
Tom York, yeah.
Well, it's like I listen to OK Computer and I don't feel like more hollow, but like you know how beautifully Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and Animals do that. Like OK Computer is like such a weak source version of those. I feel. And it's just so noticeable to me.
Sure.
And also like I much prefer like the Radiohead albums they did, like the Kid A and Amnesiac, and the two 2010s ones. I'd been into the band before 2016 album Moonshaped Pool had come out, so I do so. Even at a time when like King of Limbs was the most recent one, OK Computer just stuck out as like not being as interesting or as effective in that manner as like some of the later ones. So that's always been like that's kind of what is like noticeable about that to me in particular, is that like this is just like this could be effective, but it's just wallowing in the same feeling rather than kind of like Pink Floyd almost kind of invoked that sort of zen you were mentioning earlier out of it, and later Radiohead is kind of more in line with sort of 21st century ethereal than sort of digital eras floaty headspaces than the sort of late 90s or 90s whining in alt rock, let's say, just say. But no, Built to Spill, perfect from now on. I'm not a fan of the vocalist, and I found, as I mentioned, like by the second half of the album, I wasn't really noticing the drums, and I was even like noticing I went out of my way to say, hey, I haven't noticed the drums for a while. How do they sound? And I listened. I picked my ear up and I said, they sound pretty cool. Yeah. It's got really good guitar arrangements, and that was consistent throughout the whole thing. And God, like with Presto, funnily enough, what they're going for lyrically is quite brilliant. Like just the whole idea of perfect from now on, and then that being the way it's evoked in the opening track. You know how It's almost like Red House Painters 24, you know, at their stage, I've got it figured out. It's like,
Yeah.
the lyricist here, he's like, oh, this time I've got it, this, you know, it's like, it's going to be, like, that's such a beautiful and universal sentiment.
It's
in
definitely in
the
that
world.
vein, yeah. Similar aesthetic as well, like the album cover.
Did the vocalist and is he also the guitarist and the arranger? Was it
Yeah, it's
okay.
his thing. I think like there was like always a revolving door around him. I'm not
Okay.
too sure though.
Yeah, like, oh, this isn't the kind of thing I would listen to. Like, I can appreciate where this album succeeds, but I was not like Built to Spill, and I'd always found this album to be one of the reasons that I don't like 90s canon lists, is because, like, stuff like this is on there. And, look, I still don't really enjoy listening to it that much. Like, I actually literally, like, took a pause, like, midway through and, like, you know, just did some stuff other than like focus on it, and then I went back to it. And the second half was more pleasant to me. Maybe just as I was used to it, but like I do admire like what it's going for, and I can acknowledge that it's like part of this scene. And look, a lot of the bands that are of this vein, I'm not the biggest fan of. It's not. It just is what it is. I just don't care for this universe that much. People are welcome, yourself included, to point out, but what about this band? Maybe I'm a hypocrite in some capacity, that's possibly true, but like I just always felt like these bands never really kind of enticed me to listen to them much further than when I first like kind of explored their sounds and their kind of more acclaimed albums. But like, yeah, like I it's one of those cases where I do 100%, 101% get why people like it. It's like not as opposed to like some other shit where I'm just like, why do people waste their time listening to this or that? I get why people like this, definitely. It's not the sort of thing I really have any motivation to spend much time with. Although I have no problem admitting where it does succeed, and yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said. I mean, you even admitted the vocalist was a bit of an acquired taste.
Oh, yeah,
so
definitely.
There's no contention here. I don't think, to be honest. Anyway.
No, because it's yeah, I don't know. I just suppose it's fascinating to me how. Yeah, I guess it's like you were describing it before. It's only that world of like the music snobs or whatever who like this album. Like Radiohead, OK Computer will be like fairly popular. Like, you know, you'll hear Karma Police in like ads and stuff. You know. So I think this is a case of like perhaps it's one of those like cases of like collective like curation or whatever, where people have just decided like we can't just prop up OK Computer or Oasis or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, the other big acts of the 90s or like highly acclaimed albums.
Bjork, the Flaming Lips, Soft Bulletin. Was that more
Sure.
of an alternative choice? I don't know.
Sure.
Mutual Milk Hotel. That was one of the newer ones to be championed, maybe.
Yeah. Well,
retrospectively.
that's interesting. Yeah, that became like champion in the late 2000s in like the blog era.
Yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah, that's a great album. But somebody like that album is being like reevaluated as a meme album.
Yeah. So for only I bring up Soft Bulletin. That's one I could never get into Soft Bulletin.
Yeah,
But
that
Deserters Rev, the songs and Mercury Rev, I love them a lot.
Soft Bulletin's good when there's less Wayne Coyne on it. It's got a good sound. It's just like it'll be like, even my brother pointed this out recently. It was like there'll be songs where he's like, there's a spider bite on your hand, so we gotta break up the band. There's all these like terrible, like the lyrics on that album are terrible. I remember I have this memory of watching like back in the day. There's like a little mini Pitchfork documentary about the making of a few albums,
Yeah.
and that was one of it. And Wayne Coyne was like talking about the song "Waiting for Superman," and he's like, "I decided to open a song with a question, and I'd say, I ask you a question," and I'm like, he thought it was the deepest thing ever, and I was just like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen. So there is that like prevailing mood over that album. But there was some like genius musical arranger who was actually responsible for the sound of that.
I think Stephen Drozd, who's been in the band for a while.
Yeah, which is like, because that album does have like, if you got rid of Wayne Coyne, there is an interesting like neo-psych sound on that album.
I can't deny the
Mixed
successes
with-
of the Ishimi album production-wise, for example.
That's more like indie-tronic or electronic and neo-psych, whereas the Soft Bulletin's doing like a baroque like 60s orchestra, you know, studio thing mixed with the electronic side.
Yeah, that big British 60s psych-pop thing.
Yeah, like that sort of
Or a
thing.
carousel sort of sound.
Yeah, carousel, yeah.
The magic roundabout sort of thing.
Yeah. Which I suppose this album tried to do with guitars. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't think No, I probably heard a song off this album on Acid once, actually. Like years ago. And it was like the shortest song, so it wasn't extended mental torture, but such an interesting, vivid description.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's check it out. It's certainly a journey.
Oh God. Now I think it's time to go forth and explore some real indifferent to your expectations, wild avant-garde experiments and sensibilities. Milk from Cheltenham's Triptych of Poisoners is one of the most exciting and frenetically creative and entertaining of that end of the really experimental post-punk spectrum. We were referring to the likes of, we were talking about Simple Minds, what some of the groups invoked in the avant-garde end, you know, This Heat, Alternative TV, Throbbing Gristle in the industrial sense, or the likes of, I think they're also
Swell Maps as well.
Swell Maps are more ordinary compared with some of these guys.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, like, Milk from Cheltenham at their most normal is like a very, very, very weird Swell Maps, who were already quite weird by anyone's standards, I believe.
Sure.
Milk from Cheltenham is like a bridge between the experimental post-punk and the industrial of the UK and the kind of RIO rock and opposition world, you know, derived from Henry Cow, and then operating as bands like Universe Zero, Axe Like My Bull, Art Bears, Fred Frith's own solo work, or I don't know if you'd describe this group as that, but Art Zoid, which is like a Zool group from France, or they were from France, or Belgium, but that it's
and also like
absurd
No Wave as well.
lovely. Yes,
a bit like that too.
Likes of Mars or James Chance, Suicide, and what's another No Wave act? Some of these ones are brilliant, and I forget about them.
Oh, there's millions of them. Yeah.
Mini Pops might be a British act, but they're really cool.
Okay. Material, No Wave?
Yes.
Quite. I guess in the early days.
They're based there.
Yeah. They're out of that scene.
It's like kind of like mutant disco thing, at least. A lot of No Wave was like, you know, punk for disco bottom.
Yeah.
But no, this is one of my favourite albums, and I remember when I was exploring, this is on the post-punk chart, that famous new post-punk chart, and it was like considered like, well, this is the real weird end, you want to go here, and I absolutely loved it. And this is not a matter of, this isn't inaccessible to me, this is, weird is good. To me, verse chorus is boring for the most part, and stuff like this where it's unpredictable. To me, like, this is fantastic for one's attention span. Like, I find this sort of music the opposite of boring, and like, I know it's like some people have said, oh, sometimes you have to admit that more accessible music and you get tired of the avant-garde stuff, and it's like, well, I get tired of the accessible stuff because it's predictable, and I want to listen to stuff which kind of shakes me up. And this is the sort of thing that does it. And even stuff like extreme metal, that's predictable. You know how that's going to go. Gee, I wonder what the next song on this death metal album is going to sound like. Oh, that's a big fucking surprise, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, death metal's fine, but I'm just saying. But even that's a good thing about punk rock. You get all these strange little tempos and hardcore punk even. It's just like, it goes in these strange, like, you know, it's like this is introduces these odd capacities to enjoy like a rhythm-based sort of like series of melodies. You know, it's a very odd conjunction of these two things in a very primal shamanic manner. Whereas metal's sort of always kind of posing for a sort of, you know, subcultural crowd, whereas punk's more like, as I said, the Martians of Quatermass and the Pit. Anyway, that's Grail Marcus's analogue, not mine, by the way. That's from the late 80s. I don't want to take credit for that. And I was introduced to it obviously by K-punk, as I'm sure many of us are now. But the thing about an album like Milk from Sheldon and Triptych of Poisoners is like it's just, to me, it's one of the most immediately fun, exciting, and sort of guaranteed to be enjoyed albums to listen to. Now you got to be careful who you play it around. Most people are going to find it inaudible and just sort of noisy and a racket, but I find it immensely imaginative, creative, and at no point is it dull. It's 37 minutes, it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's, most of the songs are very short, and when they're long, it's like 5 different songs anyway. It's beautiful, and I find it, and I know it's meant to be kind of subversive to the natural order, but like maybe I'm just inclined a certain way. But this is the sort of music which I like listening to. You know, it's like if I had like a little deck and like some speakers, and I'm just looking over my modest little patch of grass, I'm relaxing and listening to something like this. Maybe seriously, like this is grand, and I guess what I'm using this album to demonstrate is, and why I'm discussing it is, honest to God, like to me, this music was never. When I first started getting into this music in late high school and you know, up to the age of like 20, it just seemed like this was. It's interesting, like something like for example the Velvet Underground second album, and how most of all of the second side was Sister Ray, and it's just always going in these strange places. That's awesome. Like that's like so cool. Like it's like some people would just be like, oh, what the fuck is this? And that's fine. I do get it. Like that, there is a logic in that, but to me it always seemed more logical as to, and maybe being a kid of the internet age and like having just data. It's just like, wow, look at all that's going on here. It's I want to decipher this, and so it's never been a matter of trying to kind of gauge something which people said was brilliant, and I couldn't gauge why it was so vastly intellectual. I guess being downstream of punk rock, it helps that this is so just like the best of punk, immediate, unpretentious, yet not bit academically concise in its own logic.
It's primordial. It's like
shamanic. As I was trying to
it's cavernous. It's trying to evoke like an earlier state of humanity and the way human culture was expressed, and it's not just a consequence of the internet age. Like people wanted this then. Hence why they made it.
They grew up on television and just stimuli all the time.
Yeah, and so there was this niche for bands like this to exist. All the ones you mentioned and stuff like that. And it's such a unique, interesting scene. It's like trying to evoke a sort of primordial state of consciousness in human culture, and that's the key to why the music is unpretentious and interesting, is because it's trying to tap into some sort of that ancient place, and just do it in such a real way, There is no pretension to it, really.
Yeah, but there is sort of a genuine, noticeable intellectual bend to that sort of punk world, at least in its UK context, in that it wanted to sort of bring the gate-kept intellectualism of the upper classes kind of full circle, where it could be used against them, and bring it back to the gutter and sort of bring everything sort of full circle for the sake of, what would you say, even, or just kind of cliche at this point, but like authenticity, if nothing else, right?
This album is from that cool scene. Like, what's the other band that we hadn't mentioned? They have that album that's like Monkey Banana Kitchen.
Oh, of course, I love them. Family Fodder.
Yeah, Family Fodder.
They'll take the Monkey House.
Yeah, they're another example of this.
They're on that chart, yeah.
Also, what this album also reminds me of is, I suppose in more of the industrial vein, is that Psychic TV album that ends with The Nursery. It's that same sort of like primordial, sort of like avant-garde music that in a way is more real than what you'd think of traditionally as real music, It sort of, it has its roots in such a deep place that, like, you can't help but just be captivated by it. This album, as opposed to that one's more like a sort of purely audio experiment, like literally being done with like some sort of new technology. Whereas this one it's more like the same sort of creative vein of that, where the songs are like these decompartmentalized, ideas of rhythms and like cacophonous sort of like vocal echoes, and that sort of overall cavernous primordial thing. But this one's almost like that being done through, like you said, the rocking opposition, like avant prog lens, and also like the pop group sort of more out there end of the like mutant disco post punk music, all this heat. And so this album is sort of like it's the sort of thing that just like you were saying, you can almost listen to it anywhere if you want to sort of similar to even like the best avant-garde music can do. Like it just puts you in this sort of abstract mind state of like for lack of a better word, tranquility. It's but it's not quite tranquility in the way is often depicted in sort of blissfulness. It's more tranquility of just being content with the moment, and that's sort of the best thing that this sort of music can evoke. And this album's definitely a great example of one of those, because as far as like out there, really avant-garde music goes, it's more reeled back with the touches of like the garage post-punk, So it's still got it still like will draw you back into it. Similar to this album reminds me most of actually. Mm-hmm. Of all things is the Parable of an Arable Land.
Sure, that's a great comparison. Yeah,
because that'll do these like psych jams and then pull it back in with these like punky songs, and that's sort of what this album does as well. And so the way it moves through the album is very natural, and like it doesn't get too caught up on like particulars,
Yeah, also when I think of albums like that, I think of albums from the 60s, like United States of America, self-titled.
Sure, yeah. That album's similar as well, and with like a lot of electronic funk outs,
Also, I think I just wanted to quickly bring up, there's some other like avant-garde examples of noise post-punk. The Wire spin-off Dome.
Yeah, Dome, yeah.
Lemon Kittens, and the two people from Lemon Kittens had some interesting solo careers.
Yeah, Daniel Dax, right? Mm-hmm. Who was the other one?
Carl Blake and Gary Thatcher.
Okay.
And Mark Perry of Alternative TV.
Yeah, okay, that's the crossover, Alternative TV.
Yeah,
because then Alternative TV crossover with Psychic TV. So all these bands are like, they seem to cross over members as well.
And also worth mentioning the group Portion Control.
Yeah, nice.
And just as far as like avant-garde post-punk LPs, just Peel Flowers of Romance. That's
nice. Definitely that as well.
And also I want to mention this American act called Nervous Gender, who have a cool album from 1981 called Music from Hell. Really, really good.
Yeah.
Because I'm just going through the post-punk chart actually and just remembering a couple things.
Yeah, no.
That's where all these came from.
I've seen that band on the chart before. Tried to see if the album was on YouTube, and it was. Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, continue.
All that stuff is good.
I was going to say, continue what you were saying about the group, if you had some more.
No, yeah, like, if you're so far inclined to, like, this sort of style of music, it's definitely a fruitful example. And, yeah, like I've been saying, it's just the sort of thing that you wouldn't think you'd be able to do with like rock instruments as well. That's the other really significant part of it too. It's just it's one of the. It's a great example of just how potent this scene is. Like, there's albums, classics from it for days, and it's going to be a never-ending stream. Like, people keep coming across them. It's almost amazing. And because they all crossed over with each other as well. Like, yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, it's important to. It's worth mentioning this was the only release at all from Cheltenham. One of the people from the band whose name is Gus Comer, but I think they were born as Lepke Buchwalter. He has an album from 1983 called Colour Him Coma. Who knows if it's on the internet?
Nice, yeah, that's cool.
And there's also a related artist called Die Trip Computer Die, which I don't know what they have in common. Oh, this looks like Lep Bookwater had some involvement with Die Trip Computer Die, and they've got albums from 1999 up until recently. 19 of them. I wasn't even totally aware of this, to be honest. That could be fascinating. And it's... You know the fascinating... You bring up the post-punk as that label, and the groups in that label just doing everything under the sun. Now,
yeah.
What are the two... It's in the name. And the name was not used at the time. It's been retroactively applied. But it gives you a mindset. The term was around at the time in journalistic sources as early as 78, like Sounds magazine and what have you.
Sure, yeah.
So it was used. Maybe was it used to apply to the things that we were talking about precisely now? Who knows? But there was, like as we mentioned, there were some post-punky seminal releases in 78 itself, which fit the label of what we now call post-punk, without a doubt. Anyway, there's the post, and then there's the punk. We know what the punk is. The punk was that attempt to kind of invoke an almost quasi-revolutionary immediacy and a kind of truth and power to rock music that had been lost in what some people saw as the initial appeal of rock music and been taken to be this sort of commercial and sort of crowd-pleasing, big, bombast, expensive direction. And the punk was an attempt to get back to the primordial id. And then the post is an attempt to get past even the barriers in punk itself and keep going and going and going to the point where it's... The reason you can't call it post music is because it's not quite so formal as that. It's music in the sense of it's derived from a performance and a collective sort of gathering, and it's a social thing rather than a institutional thing as we understand music in the classical onward sense. If the term something that would be post music we might think of in terms of the spectrum of what can be performed on a piano, for example, you know what I mean? Post music might be performed in the context of maybe even a piano strings, just plucked at strange intervals by a robot, or some rodents incentivized by certain bits of food placed at random ends, chosen by a robot on the strings themselves.
That sounds like it would have been an art piece in like the mid 20th century.
And I wish it was if it wasn't. I guess it's... And that's what was why post-punk was more interesting a concept potentially, dare I say, even than the idea of post-music, because music had transformed into an academic concept, and that's fine because there is something to be said for things existing in a certain musical spectrum as we know it, especially in the Western world, based upon an understanding of music theory and exemplified by a playing of the piano, and then we have Western musical theory highly influencing, for example, the development of bebop, as Charlie Parker discovered the ways to get this is complicated. I don't know my music theory very well at all, but he was able to get from the certain keys or chords via semitones, octaves via like semitones, I think.
Yeah, some sort of transition in the octave that skipped over a few octaves. Normally, you have to go through the octaves to get to one end of tone or whatever.
So this totally revolutionary act, which exists within that sort of... It still exists within that sort of formal Bachian, if you will, paradigm. And then the punk wanted to get back to the music...
it was mechanical as well.
In a kind of tribal respect, in a sort of... and that bring out the Martian... bring out the music is like how Harry Partch thought that Harry Partch had his own theory of music, but he felt as though everything since Bach had been like this bastardization, and I feel like the post-punk is closer to the likes of Partch's work. Maybe
sure.
Partch himself would have agreed, I don't know.
Yeah, well there is a lot of tribal rhythms in a lot of the sort of post-punk.
But anyway, like I've said all that I think might be, at least from my, worth saying, that can come out of my mouth anyway. And there's much more to be said about Milk from Cheltenham, Chip Tick Poisoners, and post-punk in general, punk as a entire concept of worth a discourse. Maybe it's better off being discussed at a convention where John Lydon, Marky Ramone, formerly of Dust, Henry Rollins, and some other people,
Yeah, what
including
is
Duff
punk?
McKagan of
Not
Guns N'
that.
Roses, can discuss punk. And if there was any indication that had punk ever died, I don't know, but I don't know when if punk died. But as of that thing, I realized, wait a minute, I don't know when, but punk died, but didn't see it die, but it must have died at some point because that thing occurred.
Yeah.
And like there was discussions about that thing occurring. The moment that thing was organized, we don't know what day that thing was organized. That's when it died.
Yeah.
Not when it was performed. Like it was dead by the time it had enacted and it took place. And like
now we live in the real post-punk world where Fat Mike from NoFX has a punk museum in Las Vegas.
Oh man, if that was organized
Now
before
that's-
that thing with John Lydon and Marky Ramone, then that would have been when it died.
Well, according to people who were around
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
punk scene, it died in 1978.
Well, you know what's an interesting thing is it's a really depressing video too, because at one point, like someone's like yelling at John Lydon for like interrupting everyone or whatever at some woman, and he just goes something like edgy like, "Oh, show us your tits," and like people are like gasp because punk's sort of become a bit more Ian McCabe and saying rude words on television.
Sure.
So then later on he like apologizes because like his wife's like going through about for everything because his wife's going through because John Lydon's wife did pass away recently.
Yeah.
She was dying at that time. So it's just this moment of because there was always that idea that Lydon wasn't the truest sort of encapsulation. It was kind of more the Malcolm McLaren thing than say, and it's even mentioned in the talk, oh, where's Glenn Matlock sort of thing. And even you look at, I think the biggest sellout is Steve Jones, like this working class British guy, but he's doing this fucking expensive Jonesy's jukebox like radio DJ gig in LA. He's disgusting, and he takes credit for Glenn Matlock's work. He's a piece of garbage.
Steve Jones.
Fuck you, Steve Jones. You fucking stink.
His best work are the "Don't Do Drugs" ads from the '80s on MTV. Go look those up right now. Like Steve Jones, drug PSA. It's the funniest shit. He's just he's such a sellout.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm making is it was too easy for even in the punk world to have these sort of icons and expectations, and obviously the accusation gets thrown toward it too much. Oh, it's just a bunch of people seeing how punk can it be if you're all trying to be a certain scene. Look, it's all part of the learning process, guys, and post-punk is part of the process too, and the post-punk revival is part of the process. And if we want to resurrect something called punk, or at least take good ideas, or useful ideas from the corpse of the memory of the thing that is dead called punk, that was once called punk, it's that it's easy, and like the OJs were saying in the song Rich Get Richer, don't lose track of what you were. Don't let it transform you. Don't let the esteem and the success transform you, because so many we see that in countless examples.
Where you come from.
Countless examples throughout history of thinking you're not part of these little people anymore, and that you become part of a different class of society, and you might not even realize it because it's such a exhilarating high, which most people don't get to experience, and so it's not in the in our evolutionary expectation to have that level of disproportionate gratification. But anyway, that's potential usefulness of punk, if nothing else, right?
And removed from the post-punk permutations, in the sense of the ethos of just first wave punk, the key to it is the final line of Anarchy in the UK, the last lyric in that song, where John Lydon suggests, like a phoenix from the ashes, you have to transcend. And how do you do that? Destroy.
Well,
and I think that is the key to the sentiment of punk's main central thesis, is this idea of destruction in a cleansing way, you know.
And as T.S. Eliot once wrote in that famous essay, to bring it round to some academia, I can't remember the name of the essay, but I read it while I was at university there. It is the job of each subsequent generation to sort of tarnish yet unknowingly, maybe I'm paraphrasing, lovingly transform it into the new.
Yeah.
And kind of take it to the next stage, you know, and in an act of, I guess a phoenix is a great analogy there. Or like, you know, what's the word? Backburning, you know.
Backburning, yeah. Backburning is a cool thing, yeah, definitely.
And now I'm going to move on from the heavy discussion, extensive discussion on this particular release, and we're going to go forth now into the world of the contemporary 21st century efforts. That's something that we can consider, well, it's harkening back to the 60s somewhat, perhaps, or like 90s sort of cyberdelia or electrodelia
thing going on.
And yet it felt, this album, as someone who was alive in the 2000s and quite young and impressionable then, I didn't hear it then, but a release like this one makes me feel as though there was an optimistic, like, dare I say, I don't want to keep harping on about this because I don't want to get too like pessimistic about the contemporary or the 2010s, because it's not a huge amount of, there's a lot of reasons to be, but it'll waste time basically is one, if nothing else. A certain optimism about at least that late 2000s period, which, I mean, it might be indicative that Animal Collective haven't done anything as interesting as these two albums. Is that a sign of the times or a sign of something else? Take it away and discuss Strawberry Jam before we get into these inane questions.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. Like, there is something very unique and magical about this album. And maybe it's a time and a place. Maybe it's just like, you know, when you're someone as creative as this collective, a collective of animals, every now and then there'll just be some sort of, all the external forces of creativity will become like a hyper compression chamber, you know, and just force out this sort of great unique jam, right?
Yeah, it jumps out of the culture and like everyone notices it.
Yeah,
well, right?
Yeah,
amazingly.
Definitely. And it's a sort of like, it's a very organic thing, I think. And I think I probably would have realized this for the first time when, like, not that long ago, maybe like a year or so, I read that the initial inspiration for the sound of this album was one of the members, I think it was Panda Bear, was on like an airplane flight. And, you know, when you get the crappy food on the airplane thing, like a Jerry Seinfeld bit or something, you get this like piece of bread and then a little bit of jelly in like a tub. And apparently this guy, he put the jelly on the bread and it started like jiggling, and he decided that that's what the sound of the album would be. And you only get these like creative inclinations that lead to this sort of thing in these sort of like pressure cooker moments, I feel, you know. And I guess why I decided to pick this album to talk about
It's the kind of thing William S. Burroughs would want you to look out for. Oddly beat in a way, despite the certain potentially hippie sheen to some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely beat and like Dada in the, like, you know, the neo-psych, I guess, started in the 80s and has had various permutations since, because the psychedelic moment was such a potent one.
Yeah, and varied in its own way, I think, as well.
Sorry?
Varied in its own way, right?
Yeah, and varied, and yeah, you can come at it from different angles, at least musically, you know.
The gamut from like Silver Apples to like Sid Barrett era Floyd to 13th Floor Elevators to Temptations.
Psychedelic music encompasses, soul, R&B, folk, rock, electronic. It permutates in all those sort of things, and this album is a great example of all that. And I guess I chose it because I would have. It's similar to like the previous one. I would have first heard it around the same time, and it's a similar sort of thing because it's a highly praised album. And like you were saying earlier, with and I said as well, the sort of tastemaker thing, and they'll lean towards this, and then this album seems like a very organic case of that, and I just have like such a fondness from it from all the way back then, and still like love listening to it all the time. It's just, there's something about it. Like I remember, for example, the first time I ever heard it was like just like sitting by myself in like a field, just like coming down off like getting stoned for maybe like the 5th time or something, and just like listening to the whole album through like my shitty like little earphone things, and it was just such a like a weirdly like melancholic like coming of age experience, while also being like tinged in a strange sort of like tropical psychedelia. And it was like on a sort of twilight afternoon. And so yeah, this album is just sort of magical in that way, I feel. Like, the songs are both like sort of poppy and harkening back to that sort of space age thing, whilst at the same time being like weird, like electronic experiments. Like that song, I think it's number 1 that they play on like Conan in the late 2000s. Yeah. It's one of the best like live TV performances I've seen. It's such abstract music to be put on like television. So that's a good example of how like even potent this like music experimentation was, even then. Like, yeah, no, this album just it sort of I guess it wears a few influences on its sleeve, like, you know, clearly like Beach Boys and sort of like Beatles, and then even later it turns out it was OMD Dazzle Ships. And it
also that sort of, not that they were ever that mainstream by comparison to how Animal Collective got fairly popular, but like that Flaming Lips very dense neo-psych moment.
Yeah.
And like assorted other bands which maybe were never as big, like Mercury Rev, My Morning Jacket, etc.
Yeah, well, Yoshimi would have been pretty big, and this is a bit downstream of that, with like the sort of the wonky electronics, the sort of indie-tronica thing. You know,
Sweet Trip, some other things out there.
And yeah, there's just something about this album that is just like pretty most Animal Collective albums are kind of amazing. But
mostly. I think the weird exception is the one they did after Merryweather, which most people don't like, and I hate to say it, but I think people are on point with kind of critiquing that.
Yeah, that album's not great.
I think that's a poor example of throwing things at the wall because, and not second guessing oneself. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe I'm missing something. I kind of hope I am. No, definitely. Like, who doesn't want to enjoy an Animal Collective album?
To me, that album sounds probably more like they were second guessing themselves too much. Whereas this album's more like throwing stuff at a wall and not second guessing it. You know, it sort of it falls in line, like I described earlier with the aeroplane jelly thing. Like, it feels like this is the sort of music that comes out of building up experience in craft. You know, by this point in this group's career, that they've really like refined their craft, and then they can sort of incorporate that through like a proper muse. You know.
Good point, but that's very true. But I don't know if given the specific sound of Strawberry Jam, it's such a necessarily a band effort. But like when you throw stuff at the wall, like other people kind of like can catch it and do really interesting things with it.
Oh yeah, they would have done it collectively, of course.
Yeah,
hence the name.
Yeah, and like for some reason I don't feel that. Like, I don't know what's going on in Centipede HZ. I just don't.
Yeah. Well.
It's not interesting, at least.
Well, like in the wake of Merryweather Post Pavilion, it makes more sense that they were second guessing too much because of this newfound critical and commercial popularity.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah,
that seems more the case, really, to me at least.
I've really enjoyed Painting With was great, and I quite enjoyed Time. Was it called Time Skiffs from 20
years ago? That was pretty good. Yeah. I think it was last year or the year before.
Yeah, I'm always excited about what they have to offer, certainly. I guess it's probably worth mentioning that the albums prior to Strawberry Jam were mostly pretty brilliant. Like Spirit They've Gone, I think Dense Manatee is very good, Campfire Songs is not bad, Here Comes the Indians pretty brilliant, Sung Tongs is very brilliant, Feels is very good. And Strawberry Jams is the first one to really sound as dense and large as it did, I believe.
Yeah, definitely.
The other ones have a more sparse sound. It's almost like this is it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it does feel like a somewhat surprising direction for them to go in. But I guess this is partly where music was going anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have run that like indie landfill sort of bandwagon and done fairly well for themselves, maybe, but it obviously wouldn't have been as fulfilling for them. I would just imagine.
See, this album, it always reminds me of like ever since I first heard it, it's like when other people hear MGMT and think it's like really good, I hear this and think it's really good. It's like
Yeah.
MGMT if it was actually done in this very like sort of artistic way, you know.
Yeah, I've always found MGMT just really kind of basic and like all the very obvious, predictable music. I used to like the song Electric Feel back when I was young because it's the only song I knew that was like that. And now it doesn't do much for me because I've heard like hundreds and literally like nearly 1,000 songs like that are better. And so it doesn't do much for me anymore. But I never liked the song Kids. That just hurts my ears. I really don't care for it. I remember the 2018 album was pretty popular. It just sounds like, oh, it's not bad. Like if someone played a track from it on a mix, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But like when I sit down and listen to it, nah. Like a lot of music just of that ilk just sounded relatively good at that point in time, you know, just because production is what it is now, you know what I mean? But like, is it truly captivating and memorable? Not really. But anyway, like yeah, Animal Collective. We were correct in assuming the number of. There's a couple like soundtrack sort of things, but we were correct in assuming that. Yeah, the albums after 70 Pages of Painting With and Time Skip. There's also something from 2023 called Isn't It Now? I think I heard this. I remember thinking it was okay. I don't know if this. I guess it's just considered another album. Yeah, it's nice. I guess I'm preferring Time Skips. I think maybe the group is suffering from that thing I mentioned earlier, where it's like they're not like just letting go, because it was easy to do that in the 2000s. Was like, and this has been pointed out in media recently. It's not just me. A more like optimistic do what they will closer to the 90s time than the 2010s, because in the 2010s you were constantly imagining you had to share something potentially on social media, especially if you were quite famous. And so it led, and eventually that was, so everyone else was just, so you always had to live with an expectation that you had to share everything that you did, and like except the stuff that you didn't, because there's always that stuff, like, you know, we can get a bit Freudian here, whatever, but there was such a feeling of optimism and like nothing can go wrong anymore, perfect from now on, in the late 2000s with these sort of albums, Animal Collectives, Strawberry Jam and Merry River Post Pavilion. They manifest very beautifully, and they're so re-listenable, those two in particular, and all their albums are great. But I will jump on the bandwagon and claim that I do think their most Song Tongs is pretty brilliant, but like, and then Spirit They've Gone. But like Strawberry Jam and Merry River Post Pavilion are awesome. I think Strawberry Jam is probably the one I like a little more than Merry River Post Pavilion. That's pretty brilliant. It's just, I you know, there is good music coming out now. We've made that point in a few shows.
Forever and Green is like the indie rock epic. It's like the legitimate Stairway to Heaven.
I just feel as though with all the interesting music coming out right now, it seems Animal Collective could deliver their true masterpiece.
Yeah.
And they're capable of so much more. As great as Painting With is great. I don't want to take anything away from that. But Time Skips wasn't as good as Painting With, and I don't remember Isn't It Now. If I don't remember much about it, but so I can't say I like it more than Time Skips. More can be done, guys. Although you look, they could retire tomorrow, and like I would still herald them as geniuses. And they are still, for what it's worth, one of my more favorite recording acts of all time, just for those two albums alone. Like if they just released those two and there was nothing else, even, and even if they stopped after Fields, I would have thought, oh man, what else could they have done? The stuff was so brilliant, and yeah, they've released pretty good stuff since then. I feel like I want them to be a group that crosses into, I mean they kind of have, but like really properly through 3 decades, because even in the 2010s you really just had Painting With, because Time Skips is 22, so far not too bad in the early 2010s, and they have that one in the mid 2010s, the 2016. They nailed the 2000s. They're one of the most, if not the best, mainstreamish English language American act of the 2000s, but I think more can be done, and maybe I'm just being an ungrateful sort of spoiled fan here, but I believe in them. I take it as a compliment, lads. If you don't like.
Yeah, if one of the members are listening to this on the like very narrow chance, like probably the same statistical probability of like life occurring on Earth in the first place. If you're listening to this, listen to Milk from Cheltenham. and do that. That would be cool.
Yeah. I mean, God, like that would be a dream come true. That would be. God, it would be hard to believe that would be happening. But we're in a very strange world right now.
They could just call the album Milk from Cheltenham as well.
Yeah,
And
no
get
one
people
care.
onto that band.
Yeah. Beautiful point. You want more to share about Strawberry Jam?
Nah, like I just kind of want to keep talking about it for ages. So for brevity's sake, just listen to it because it speaks for itself. It's maybe a bit out there. It's an interesting case of, like you said, quasi mainstream or whatever, because it was so close to being like mainstream music. I guess that's why I cited MGMT earlier in the 2000s, and like for something to be so abrasive, to be that close, like abrasive and abstract, I think is just kind of admirable.
I'd like to play a brief little, I don't know if you'd even call it a game, maybe just a mildly interesting observation here.
Do I have to saw my foot off?
No.
Oh, play a game like that.
Oh, like Jigsaw. No, excuse me. I'm not. FOTD is not a saw kind of guy. Let's just say that.
I saw that movie once as a kid.
Yeah, it's weird to have an Australian origin. I feel great about that. I'm looking at the 10 best rated albums of 2007 on RYM, and it seems as though, because Animal Collective Strawberry Jam is at number 7, but it seems to piss on the other 10. Like, can't say I really know Fas Eit Maledicti in Ignem Aeternum by Deathspell Omega, which is black metal. Look, I don't know, it's probably not better than... That's a 10, so it's not rated better anyway. But can you believe For Emma Forever Ago by Bon Iver is on here? It's disgusting.
Bon Iver.
And then
to be fair, I haven't heard that, but I'm sure I have.
Bon Iver is fucking gross.
Yeah.
And then we have this depressive black metal thing, Gris, and the album's called Irritate und Foret, and then of course Strawberry Jam. And I'm a big fan of Graduation by Kanye West. I think that's one of the better ones he put out. I'm happy with that's the second best one here. And then we've got I know this group. I may have listened to one of their other things, and their refinement of the Decline, Stars of the Lid. It's like ambient, drone. Those are the labels in bold. What appears to be a re-recording / new performance of Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich with Grand Valley State University New Music Ensemble. I know the 70s album. I listened to that a few times, like back in when I was 20, when 2016, when I was into Terry Riley and Philip Glass. Like that's the original recording is very good. I don't think I'd sooner play it than Strawberry Jam, but one might be more important in a formal sense, or not. I don't know. I get Steve Reich. Yeah, well, I get it. Sound of Silver by LCD Sound System, that's good.
Yeah.
The one I like the most is the third one now. This is happening, and I didn't like the America album that they did later. I was a bit let down by that. American Dream. What's 4533? Is that a remix album?
If anything's called American Dream, you just know it's gonna suck.
What's LCD Sound System? There's a collaboration with Nike called 4533.
I don't know.
It's between the first and second albums. I've never heard of that.
No.
That sounds insane. Untrue by Burial. That's good. We can't go too.
Yeah, sure.
Nice little K-punk choice, I guess there. And In Rainbows by who we were mentioning before, of course, Radiohead.
Oh, yeah.
It's fairly likable, but it's an album that's more production than anything else.
Yeah.
And I literally read on Wikipedia that the band were in a kind of state of creative, they'd been kind of stalling on the album. They didn't really know what to do, so they brought back the old producer Nigel Godrich in, and he was like, "All right, guys, let's come on, let's get things into gear."
Yeah.
And then they got the album out.
Okay.
So, is Nigel Godrich the producer, the secret genius behind much of Radiohead? Look, all I'm going to say here is I'm someone who thinks that the most talented person involved in the Beatles might have been Mr. George Martin himself. So my answer to the Radiohead and Nigel Godrich thing is, yeah, fucking probably. And with that, we'll leave you guys to it.
Yeah, probably.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, well, just quickly,
please.
because you mentioned Kanye, I just want to mention, in the spirit of hypnagogic concepts and ontology. I wish I had a time machine, because you brought up Kanye West, and I wish I could go back in time to like the graduation era, or like maybe even a bit earlier, and just be like point at the college dropout album cover and just be like, yep, that guy, he's gonna be like the biggest leader of like white supremacist thought in the 21st century. How strange would that be? Like
no one would predict that. And
it's
like,
so.
I kind of checked out of the news when that happened. I mean, it had before, but that like really encouraged me to keep just checking out of the news.
I think that's one of the most potent pop culture examples of this overstimulated, like hyper, post like Marshall McLuhan-esque, like no Marshall McLuhan. What's the guy again? The Canadian guy.
That's McLuhan.
Yeah, McLuhan. Yeah. You know, the media theory.
Off.
The guy who invented media theory. Or
That's
whatever.
McLuhan, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the most potent example of this like paradigm we've been talking about in this episode. It's like if you went back to 2004 and like said that teddy bear rapper is that guy, then people would just not believe you.
He's on InfoWars, like wearing just all with this black hood.
Yeah, in like a gimp suit. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, honestly.
It's too much. It's, as I said, like it made me feel as though I was right to kind of check out of the news. I suppose on that note, we'll leave you all to it. This has been Peter St. John signing off.